And I'm Guy, and this is your home for everything Alberta independence, as well as the downfall of Canada, which is making headlines today.
I would say which is imminent right now, basically.
Absolutely.
But
And I will say, anybody that watched the show yesterday will know I said 3 times that I think Mark Carney was going to intentionally sabotage the deal in order to federalize Canada. And I pointed out step by step how that would go down. He's going to economically collapse Canada, which is going to cause provinces to go to the federal government for bailouts. He's going to offer bailouts for federalization, not just to provinces, but to private industries as well. He's already announced some of those steps today. We're going to get into that and a whole lot more.
yes, I meant to go to you when you were saying that. But first of all, before we get into all the mess that Canada is in, thank you so much for joining us today. Happy Saturday. Hopefully you're enjoying your Saturday. Thank you for being here. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so. It really helps us out. I know a few people have subscribed recently, so thank you so much. We do have incoming more videos, edited videos, etc. But we try to read most, if not all, of your comments live if you're new here after each segment. But we pause the whole show for super chats, and those really help us out as well. And we have memberships. Thank you so much to all our members.
Absolutely.
And I'll start saying hello to everybody. Shauna Vision says, good evening, what a mess we are in. Yes, but don't say we didn't tell you. Well, the guy didn't tell you, so because he's been hammering on this drum for the past month and a half.
I've been hammering on federalization of Canada since Mark Carney came into office, and every step he's making behind the scenes with building these different mechanisms points to federalization. A lot of people said he's not going to lean into natural resources if you read his book. I said the opposite. I said he's going to completely lean into natural resources. He's betting his entire career on natural resources, but first he needs federalization. Now, the mechanism that hit yesterday is the major mechanism I was waiting for Mark Carney to march forward with federalization on every level, from natural resources to provincial to federal federalization, as well as private businesses, giving bailouts for percentages of companies.
And getting us every step closer towards actual communism, which socialism is just the softer version of it.
Well, I would say after what happened today, Canada is firmly going to become a resource colony, and it's going to be highly socialized, meaning it is moving towards socialism and eventually communism. It's very obvious at this point. He wants to take the power from the people and install it in the federal government's hands.
Yes. And also, George J. Byrne, hello, says, Carney, a God complex net zero globalist, refused to follow the USA right to repair order and DEF removal.
Yeah, now's the time to get out, Alberta. You're the only one that's going to have this opportunity. Quebec said they're not going to hold the referendum until after Trump's out of office. It's going to be too late by then, because Mark Carney is going to collapse the economy and federalize Canada, which is going to make it almost impossible for anybody to separate after that. Even Saskatchewan's timeline is not looking good now. Alberta was the first to move, so they're in a good position right now. October 19th will decide the fate of Alberta and if Albertans continue to get freedom.
Yes. But also, hello to Anya Zinski. Thank you for being here. Says, I agree. What a mess. Trump, come save Alberta. And literally, we just need that continuation of the Trump administration on a J.D. Vance or a Marco Rubio or whatever combination of those two, but to ensure, because that administration has said that they would recognize it.
It's not up to Trump to save Alberta. It's up to Alberta to save Alberta. And we have a vote on the 19th where we have the real opportunity to do that. We need to send a message to not only the Trump administration, but the Americans. We don't want to go down the road Canada is going to. We want our independence. We want to be a free and independent country. We want zero trade. We want to be a good trading partner and a good ally on your northern border. That's the message we can send on October 19th. And we can also send another message to Ottawa that we don't want anything that you're offering anymore.
Tariff-free trade, not zero trade. More trade with the U.S. And Yazinski says, I hope more Albertans are waking up. Well, hopefully so. But again, with this federalization plan, Mark Carney can go ahead and continue to say, yes, I'm going to build pipelines, actually build them, but maintain and retain the control and the production levels and the hiring of whoever gets to work on those pipelines.
Yeah, it's very scary what's going on right now, because he didn't just announce the cancellation of the deal, which that didn't have to happen because the Mexicans went into official trade talks and built in a stopgap, meaning they were immune to any future tariffs as long as they continued in negotiations. This is a normal mechanism put into official negotiations, but because Canada never entered into official negotiations, they weren't able to subject the Americans to that. So Trump was able to threaten them with tariffs. That's exactly what Mark Carney wanted here.
Yeah. Print of Alberta, hello, says, cool. I hope everyone is doing great and glad to see Nat and the guy. Glad to read you too. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much. And so is everybody here that is joining the conversation. That is the whole point of having a live. So thank you for all your comments. And Silverfeet, hello. Thank you for being here. Austin Westwood says, hola, Nat and Guy, about that trade deal. Oh, wait.
Well,
LOL.
and there's one more problem with the trade deal. And before I forget some of these things, I want to mention them off the top. And that's Mark Carney says he's going to go tariff for tariff, retaliatory tariffs towards the United States. That points to federalization again, because he's going to be able to pick how he wants to economically damage Canada one province at a time, seeing which province he wants to federalize first, which province he wants to ask the federal government for a bailout, and in return, what's he going to ask? He's going to ask for federalization. That's obvious at this point. Also, major manufacturing and other major companies in Canada that are taking these loans, thinking there's not going to be a price to pay in the future. There is. Future loans are going to come with federalization and percentages of the company going to the federal government. That is communism.
And Shauna Vision also says, I'm so tired of the idiocy in this country, which is why we want Alberta to leave and be independent and be able to birth a new nation, and also the reason why we left a few years ago.
Mark Carney has a lot riding on Alberta right now, and this is going to be an issue. It's looking like there's maybe a lot of interference in this election. They're already saying they cannot hire enough people within Alberta to count the ballots, and they're going to have to hire outside of Alberta and potentially non-Canadian citizens. This does not seem right to me. It seems like there's something fishy in the air. Forever Canada is not showing where they're getting their money from. They're also saying anybody in Canada can donate money to Forever Canada. It's supposed to be people only in Alberta.
Exactly. Ep.2 Smooth says, I bought a heat pump. Might be necessary sooner rather than later, I would say. Philip Vespa, hello. Thank you for being here. Says, of course, Carney turned down the deal of a lifetime. Quebec is a rotten cancer that Alberta must rid itself of. Honorable mention goes to Thug Ford, the destroyer of prosperous jobs. And then Carney himself.
Well, and yesterday, while everybody was waiting for that deal to come in to kind of hang Carney up, I said, I think he's going to back out of this thing either just before the deal or just after the deal. It would either be Carney or a premier that would intentionally sabotage the deal. This was the perfect mechanism to start federalization. I'm also going to show later, and I grabbed clips because I was talking about liberals saying we need a Pierre Trudeau federalization strategy for the modern era, and that's what Mark Carney has to do. He has to get his elbows up and federalize Canada. They've been talking about this for quite a while. I finally grabbed some clips so I can show all of you that the writing's on the wall. If Alberta doesn't break free now, it's never going to happen. And if you don't live in Alberta, either move to Alberta or move out of the country. That's the point we're at now.
Yeah. And Shauna Vision, thank you so much, says, hey, just subscribed and I'm proud to have done so, but my subs were set to private. Thank you so much. And
thank you.
Very grateful here. Primors007 says, Hola Nat Igay, when it comes to Canada, you would do well to expect the worst outcome, hence why I'm never surprised anymore.
Absolutely.
And then, which is why I'm also never surprised anymore and kind of glad to not be there.
Yeah, the same way Mark Carney wants the provinces to come to him, exchanging dollars for power through a federalization process, he's going to probably offer the same thing to the people as well through a UBI. Give up your freedoms and I'll give you an UBI, which is a universal basic income, because the economy is about to crash. And that is also going to usher in a digital currency without a shadow of a doubt. The writing is all over Canada right now, and it is not looking good.
And continuing on the tradition of the Canadian federal government's keeping the citizens comfortable enough so they don't revolt, complain, or notice what is actually happening.
Well, and a lot of people might say, well, what's wrong with the federalization of natural resources? Canada has a ton of them. It will benefit Canada. It will benefit the people. No, it will not benefit the citizens or the provinces once the federalization mechanisms are in there, because we know he's opening up the gates to mass immigration. The other mechanism he's already built in is people can work from province to province right now, so he can open up the floodgates to mass immigration, hire a lot of these mass immigrants directly into the natural resource sector, undercutting wages for traditional citizens. And why does he want to do that? Because the federal government is going to be the major investor in these natural resource contracts, and they're going to want to get as close to slave labor as they can. It's the Chinese model, and Canada is bringing it into their own country here.
And also being very happy to be now further partnered with places like China. Philip Vespa says, I don't see Spanish labeling on California wine. Why does Canada insist that the charter applies to other countries? Nat, I don't think anyone in Mexico forced Guy to speak Spanish at his job. Well, I kind of do. This is his job. And I do wish he did speak Spanish. It would make my life easier. But slowly, but I don't know, even surely, but hopefully one day he'll learn Spanish. He knows how to order ice cream. That's about it. And J-Man Hello says, we Americans care about Alberta. Good. And we need Americans to care, even especially now, about Alberta specifically, because it would also highly benefit the U.S. to actually have that as a country that does want trade and that does have those resources.
Not just that, the Americans are going to play a very crucial role in Alberta's future. We have a non-binding referendum coming up. After that, hopefully we can get to a binding referendum. Once we win that binding referendum, I fully expect Canada to not let Alberta leave. They got 10 excuses to Sunday. They can say, oh, the provinces haven't approved it or any other things. The only mechanism we have left after that point, after we win 2 referendums, is to make a unilateral declaration of independence. And when that happens, we need the Americans to support that, whether it's Trump or J.D. Vance. One of the big reasons I support J.D. Vance is I think he is the most likely candidate after Trump, if the process takes longer, that will recognize Alberta as a free and independent country.
David W. Carlson says, Canada is FUBAR, part of my language. That means effed up beyond all recognition. I did have to look it up. Yes, I am old. Option Trader says, I come in peace. We know. Thank you for being here. Says, Guy, you called it, sir. Carney blew up the deal and blamed Orange Man bad. I didn't see it coming, but you did.
Absolutely. And the only reason I seen it coming is for the same reason people kind of called me crazy for the last year. I keep talking about federalization because I keep seeing the mechanisms behind the scenes that Mark Carney is building. And I know Mark Carney wants the Canadian natural resources to be the bailout for this globalist utopia dream that he has along with Europe. That's why he's bringing Canada and Europe closer together. I constantly talk about the federalization of not only natural resources, but all of Canada. And that's become very clear today. Again, Mark Carney could have went into official negotiations and put what's called a stopgap in. We're going to review that clip again. Once you enter into official negotiations, you can insert a mechanism so your trading partner, which would be America, is not able to threaten future tariffs as long as you continue to be in those negotiations. Mexico currently has that.
And over at RUMBLE, I'll quickly say hello to Christo. Hello, says, good Saturday, dears. Alberta independence is closer today than yesterday. Let's effing go. Yes, and hopefully more people will open their eyes. Christo says, I hope the U.S. will impose a 200% tariff on China. Foreign soldiers, foreign workers, foreign election workers, etc. Elbows up, eh? Yeah. Exactly.
One of the big issues here is we are so much closer today than we were yesterday. Nobody's voting against this. Very few people are actually going to make it out to the polls after what Mark Carney did today to make a statement, oh, I want to stay on this sinking ship. Nobody's going to do that. But because of that, because the odds of independence have become so much more likely, Mark Carney is so much more likely to actually cheat in this election. It's very important that we get these scrutineering jobs, that we get the poll counting jobs. We need to apply for this, and we need to raise hell if they start hiring people outside of Alberta, because if they do that, it's going to be very hard to kind of research and reach out to these people after the election to investigate what happened if this does not go our way. I would be shocked if it doesn't go our way after what happened today with Mark Carney.
Yes, and Kate for you says, sorry I'm late. That's okay. Says, let's hear it for Alberta independence. Let's effing go. Yes, and let's also go to breaking news, which we've just been talking about this whole time, but let's formalize it.
Well, I'm going to say most, if not almost all of today is going to revolve around this trade deal. What went down, why it didn't need to go this way, what's Mark Carney's ultimate plans. I've outlined some of that, but I'm going to show the evidence here, not only from things that I'm saying, but from things a lot of liberals are saying in their little think tanks online.
Yes, so let's go to breaking news.
Extra, extra, read all about it. Extra, extra,
Breaking news, Canada's effed even more thanks to this guy.
And I wanted to start out with just the basics, just his statement, and then we're going to read the written statement. Obviously, he's lying through his teeth here. We know that because we can see what's happening in the Mexican trade deal. And they've been very transparent with the public, giving out daily readings, explaining to the public how their negotiations actually work, why the U.S. can't threaten any tariffs to Mexico right now because they built in a mechanism in the contract. Canada could have done the same, but they decided not to go into official negotiations.
Yes, Juno News says Prime Minister Mark Carney addressed Canadians Saturday after the U.S. trade talks collapsed late Friday. He declares the era of deeper economic integration with America is over, saying America has changed, adding that Canada won't accept a deal at any price.
For over a year, Canada has worked in...
And pause it. I'm sorry to pause it so quick. They haven't worked in good faith for a year. They haven't worked at all. Actually, they didn't show up to multiple negotiations. The Mexicans were the ones that first outed them, and then the Americans outed them. This is why they wanted the talks to be secret, so they can leak to the general public in Canada that they were in good faith negotiations when they weren't. Furthermore, they were never in official negotiations. Part of what this deal yesterday was supposed to be, one of the concessions Canada wanted, was for the Americans to announce that they were in official negotiations, because if they got that official negotiation status, they could have built in that mechanism so the United States could no longer threaten tariffs as long as those negotiations continued.
We've been pragmatic, patient, and persistent. We pursued every opportunity to reach an agreement that protects Canadian workers and their families, that strengthens our economy, and that respects Canadian sovereignty. We've been under no illusions. We recognized from the start that America has changed. Early last year in this room, I observed that the decades-long process of steadily increasing integration between our economies was over. Our government understood before many that America would transform all of its commercial relationships, that it would put a series of tariffs on its closest allies and use economic integration as a weapon. We recognize that sometimes its signature was written in pencil. We worked in that context to try to strike a fair deal on which Canadian businesses and workers could rely. Our goal has always been to get the best deal for Canadians.
And pause it again. And again, he was never in official negotiations. Not until Trump threatened a 50% tariff did they go into negotiations for that one threat, not for official negotiations for the overarching USMCA.
For a deal at any price or on any time frame. Last month, when the United States announced another round of unjustified tariffs, I gave our negotiating team a new mandate to seek a fair deal negotiated in good faith. Because I believe that people on the ground, on both sides of our border, want this relationship to work. The bonds between Canadians and Americans are long, and they remain strong. A mutually beneficial trade agreement is possible. One that respects our sovereignty, one that builds on our complementary strengths, one that lowers costs for families on both sides of the border, one that creates good jobs for our workers. Canada has always worked towards these goals, even while America's attention and dedication to them have wavered.
And it's just filled with lies and propaganda. And the reason I constantly show what's going on in the Mexican negotiations with their transparency, with the daily readouts, with the mechanisms they built in so Trump couldn't threaten future tariffs, it's an apples to apples comparison. Because it's the USMCA, it's the exact same contract for the Canadians as it is the Mexicans. The Mexicans took the complete opposite path than the Canadians. The Canadians didn't even enter into negotiations. They tried to avoid a threat Trump made, and the only reason he was able to make that threat is because the Canadians decided not to go into official negotiations for well over a year now.
And the problem with Canada is not just the elbows up crowd, but even the conservatives that were saying the exact same thing. PP and a bunch of commentary people were saying, no, we have to go hard against the U.S. Canada, you have to understand your place. You have to understand that you're not in a position of strength, and you almost never have been, and you are highly dependent on the U.S. So by doing this, you're not showing the U.S. The U.S. basically is going to be not that badly affected by this, but Canada is going to be destroyed with this.
Canada's very much Canada's very much in a position of strength, and if they would have just put their elbows down, put their ideological differences aside, and really went to the table like Mexico has done, they would have a chance for a real trade deal. The natural resource wealth, the oil and gas in Canada is absolutely immense. Trump is focused on the Western Hemisphere, and it's just a damn shame that the Canadians couldn't put their differences aside to actually be adults and negotiate this like a real negotiation. And we can see how this happens. Canada can say all day, it's orange, mad, bad, he's crazy. One day he's this, one day he's that. Mexico laid out a roadmap, tit for tat, exactly what you need to do in order to get there. And there are daily readouts of their negotiations.
But currently, Canada is not really in a position of strength because as it is, they're not really using their natural resources as much. So they don't even have that card to play. They have the potential of it, but they don't have it actually currently.
Oh, well, they do have it because they can start leading into that. They can start giving out contracts to mining companies, to oil and gas companies, things like that. Carney does not want to do this because this has nothing to do with this trade deal. This has everything to do with federalization. It will be impossible to federalize Canada if you have strong provinces and strong citizens, economically strong, I'm talking about. What he needs is for provinces to come begging hand in hand because they're absolutely broke, bankrupt, and they can't fund basic services, asking for handouts from the federal government. And in exchange for those handouts, Carney is going to ask for federalization. It's obvious at this point, and he's going to go one province at a time.
Which is why it's been essentially a ping pong of the past 24, 48 hours of the messaging even coming from Canada and the propaganda arm of the federal government, which is the mainstream media. The real Mr. Bench says, quote, "We're very close." That was Dominic LeBlanc yesterday, the main negotiator for Canada. Today, the trade talks collapsed. 50% U.S. tariffs are taking effect. Even the CBC has to report the wreckage now. Mark Carney was sold to Canadians as the master negotiator, and yet he could just run and hide.
The Trump administration confirming tonight there is no deal ahead of the tariff midnight deadline, meaning that tariffs will go into effect at 12:01 Eastern time.
This is maybe the worst case scenario. It was through the day today, we were debating whether the deal that we were all hearing rumblings and briefings about was going to be enough. Would it be good enough for Canadian businesses? I can tell you for certain that this development is not good. And it's not just the tariffs, Susan. The tariffs will be a disaster for the sectors that will be hit by them. They will, where these tariffs hit, much like the ones we've been dealing with for 18 months, they will hit very hard and they will be catastrophic for some businesses. But the collapse in talks might be even worse. And the injection of uncertainty that has now been brought to the fore in the Canadian economy that has been struggling and dealing with uncertainty for 18 long months and really having a hard time with that. This is much deeper. And Mr. Carney now saying we're going to respond with dollar-for-dollar tariffs, which is very, from the Canadian side, steep escalation. Jameson, or an American official, has said that if Canada retaliates, the president will be given options to level out the playing field yet again. So we're into this cycle.
Okay, and you can leave it there. And something else I will say is after the midterms, Trump is going to completely pull out the USMCA. He's going to give a six-month notice, and he will then announce a trade deal with Mexico, a bilateral trade deal. Mexico will be the big winner here, I think. And yeah, you can keep going.
And speaking on Mexico, the fact that Mexico did the exact opposite, and there is that example, and again, it's the country on top and the country on the bottom of the U.S. acting in completely different ways and getting completely different results. So the whole orange man bad, they don't want to negotiate. It's because Canada didn't go into the negotiations, because we've seen what happens when you actually either are kind of forced into them or are just willing to go through them for the past year and a half that Mexico has been doing.
Well, and these dollar-for-dollar tariffs they're talking about, it's not what everybody thinks. This allows Mark Carney to literally pick what province he wants to federalize first and have them give up their power. He will economically break them through different tariffs. He will not focus on Alberta until after this non-binding referendum. If he can win that non-binding referendum, then he's going to want to break Alberta, and he can shut off the oil. And a lot of people will say, well, he can't shut off the oil. It's coming out of Alberta. Yeah, but it goes interprovincially. And that's the problem. Alberta's never built a pipeline directly from Alberta to the United States, because if they had, the federal government wouldn't have the ability to shut it off. But once Mark Carney's ready to break the economic back of Alberta, you better believe he's going to. He's going to have to wait a little longer for Alberta than every other province because of the potential non-binding referendum. And if we win that, he has to wait even longer for that binding referendum.
But also, again, the lies coming out of both Carney and mainstream media in Canada cannot compare to what the U.S. does come out to say, and then it gets really muddled. Scott Robertson says, quote, U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer blames Canada for the collapse of trade talks. New demands and walkbacks of other commitments by Canada have upended the careful balance reached in the past.
And we have to talk about this clip because everybody is showing this clip. Everybody's saying, well, the Americans are saying one thing, the Canadians are saying another thing. We don't know who to believe. Mark Carney's an economist.
Banker.
Donald Trump is a shady businessman is what they keep calling him on liberal media, which is absolutely ridiculous. But we know the Americans are telling the truth here because we can look at the Mexican negotiations. I know I keep saying this, but the Mexicans went into official negotiations. Canada never entered into official negotiations. When the Mexicans did that, they built in a stopgap so the Americans could no longer threaten future tariffs as long as they continued in negotiations. If those negotiations became canceled at any point, the Americans could then threaten tariffs again.
Canada declined to finalize the trade deal under the terms agreed earlier this week. Despite the U.S. offer to Canada to receive the best treatment of any major exporter to our market, new demands and walkbacks of other commitments by Canada have upended the careful balance reached in the past days. Canada declined.
And another thing here is the Canadian media keeps saying, well, if we made a deal with Trump, he could have just threatened more tariffs and more tariffs and more tariffs and then keep hollowing us out. What was ever going to stop him? Well, part of what this deal was supposed to be was to enter into official negotiations so no more threats of tariffs could come through. Nobody has mentioned that, not independent media, not mainstream media. I don't think anybody's looked at the Mexican negotiations, and I don't think they're aware of this. If there are any other content creators watching, please start mentioning this to the Canadian public. This does not fall on the Americans. This falls 100% on Carney's head, and it's 100% intentional. There's a long-term strategy here for federalization.
But also, you added this clip from Energy Media. I'll just play it, I guess.
No, I want to talk about this real quick. There's a series of a lot of liberal think tanks as well as liberal commentators and interviewers that are talking about the federalization. We need to get our elbows up and we need to federalize Canada. They often call it a Pierre Trudeau 2.0 strategy. Elbows up. Mark Carney needs to implement federalization now. We're in a basic wartime situation here. Donald Trump is being extraordinary aggressively with Canada. This is their words, not mine. This is how I knew federalization was coming, and he never wanted a trade deal. He never entered into official talks because he was always planning to pull out at the last minute, blame it on Trump, and then march Canada into communism through federalization.
Well, we're going to have to develop more federal horsepower is my answer to that question. In World War II, the federal government role expanded relative to the provinces because it had to, because the situation warranted it. So the Liberals, who had traditionally been the party of leave it to the provinces, became the party of the strong federal state. That's where that comes from. I think we may be entering a similar period. We've put up, for example, for 159 years with hundreds of interprovincial trade barriers because it was too much political bother to fix it, and we were a rich country, and what do we care if we lost a few points on GDP from these needless internal trade barriers? Well, we can't deal with that anymore. We have to confront interprovincial.
And pause it. And this is the soft sell. They're going to try to sell it as, oh, we're just taking down interprovincial trade barriers. They want to get everybody on board with this idea of federalization. This is a uniparty idea. This is why Pierre is saying, and we're going to show it later, that we should go dollar for dollar tariffs and we have to stick together as Canada. Mark Carney is going to build all the mechanisms of federalization, attempt to push it through, but he also has to orchestrate an economic collapse at the same time. So the provinces will give federalization to the federal government. At any point, he is thrown out of power or he has to win a re-election and can't, the conservatives will come in there and finish up the mechanisms that are already built for them. Both the conservatives and the liberals are going towards federalization. We're going to show in our conservative section later, conservative politicians talking about federalization as well. This is a uniparty strategy now. This is the future of Canada. Only Alberta has the opportunity to get out and maintain its freedom.
Trade barriers, because that's part of a larger project of raising our national productivity, because that has just become a situation that's too urgent to ignore. Well, that alone is the only way you're going to ever fix that is with a stronger federal role. Even today, you're seeing, after there were a lot of fine words spoken in April of 2025 about how the provinces were finally going to ditch their trade barriers, and it's really subsided since then. Every self-respecting federation, that is a role of the federal. That is the role of the federal government, or one of the roles of the federal government, because it transcends any individual province's interests. You need a strong federal power that can knock down interprovincial trade barriers. Well, how are we going to do that? Well, the provinces are.
Well, how are we going to do that? And now he's going to get into it. And they're not hard selling it yet, but he's not the only liberal talking about this. They are absolutely all over the independent media. It's this elbows up rhetoric, and their solution is federalization. They've been pitching it for quite some time now. When I say quite some time, we're saying about 2 or 3 weeks. When it's already making its way out to the independent media, you have to figure the game plan was set by the Liberal government a long time ago. I've been talking about it for a long time because I knew this was the only solution that the Liberals would be able to come up with. And it's going to strip freedom from its citizens. It's going to strip power and sovereignty from the provinces.
Facing a very grim fiscal future. With the aging of the population, another emergency, slow-moving emergency, but an emergency. So, glaciers are slow moving, but eventually they crush you. And the aging of the population, we're only partway through the process. The percentage of the population over the age of 65 in the early 70s was about 7 or 8%.
And they're already talking about population. These liberals said we were overpopulated. What they're talking about right now is federalization and then an absolute influx of mass immigration. These two things are going to alter the future of Canada immensely.
It's now at 19 or 20%. It's headed for 27, 28, maybe 30%. By the sort of later stages of this century, sorry. So 50 years, 60 years from now. That's just enormous. And the main thing, of course, is for healthcare. The costs that implies for healthcare, where we're already straining as it is. We're already in a situation where provinces are spending 50% of their own source revenues on that one department. And even as they're spending all that money, we've got wait lists that are close to 30 weeks from referral to treatment, longer than ever. And both of those are only going to get worse. So my point being, the provinces are in a dire fiscal straits. The feds are in somewhat less dire fiscal straits, not great, but they're in a much stronger position than the provinces are. And that may be a point of leverage going forward for some kind of grand bargain where the feds agree not to give the provinces more cash, but to give them more tax room. So the provinces can raise more money, but be accountable to their own taxpayers for it. And in exchange, the provinces got to acknowledge the federal role in enforcing interprovincial trade internal trade, I should say, economic union, and in some of these other matters that are going to require a very strong leading federal role in infrastructure in particular. So there's some sort of reshaping, I think, that's inevitable. Whether anybody's wants that or is thinking about it
Okay, and
right
you can
now,
leave it there. And he gave away the game there, talking about we will exchange federal power for bailouts to provinces. And that's just dealing with provinces. Then they're going to deal with the people through a UBI, a similar strategy here. The only investor for these natural resource projects going forward is going to be the Canadian government, because the restrictions and regulations are so high, they can't get private investment. This is the complete communization and federalization of Canada without a shadow of a doubt. The game was given away yesterday when Mark Carney walked away from the deal at the 11th hour, which I said he would just hours before he did.
Exactly. And just to paint a picture, Eric Thorvaldson says, Canada in 2026, I fear we just gave our best little self-important yappy bark, and now the sliding door is opening.
And what's going to happen when this federalization happens? Mark Carney seems to think he's going to float the EU and these globalist dreams. What happens if the United States puts a blockade on the east or west coast of Canada? Because they're not going to have that happen. Absolutely not. Canada's going to become a resource colony after their federalization, whether it's to the EU or to the Americans, one way or another. My bet would be the Americans are going to break the Canadians, and Canada won't be anything more than a resource colony. This is why it's important for Alberta to break free now. It's more important now than ever. Things are going to start moving at a breakneck speed over the next 24 months. Carney wants to try to accomplish all this before he leaves office, and he knows he probably can't win a second term.
But also especially because another point that we were talking about of Canada becoming a resource colony could be towards the EU. And we continue to also hear talk about that and the potential of that. And if Alberta leaves, well, a lot of that leverage is kind of taken away. Not all of it, of course. Other provinces also have a lot of natural resources, and that could be further exploited once they decide to, once they're able to control it federally. But
the problem here is other provinces have natural resources, but Alberta is the only one that has leaned into their natural resources, meaning they've already developed refinement for oil, natural gas, and other sectors. These other provinces are extremely underdeveloped. British Columbia can't even refine their own mining minerals. They send it down to the United States, and then they get the finished product back, whatever they don't sell to the Americans. How do I know this? Because I used to work in the mining industry within British Columbia. A lot of provinces have a lot of natural resources, but it's going to take decades to actually build the refinement capability needed, as well as the pipelines needed. A west to east coast pipeline in order to get energy out to Europe, that's a pipe dream. That's going to take a decade. It's going to be an economic, devastating decade for Canada, period.
And yet they did kind of announce that they wanted to do something similar to that. But now let's go back to your comments. Sean, hello, Sean, says, Forever Canada should do a rally from one of Canada's famous places on the deck of the Expo 86 McBarge. Oh, I guess they can't do that. Canada will never recover from the McBarge loss. And also making it a beautiful metaphor for the way Canada is continuously sinking and decaying and eventually will just end up on the ground. Sean also says Canada is cooked. Their two overwhelming benefits are access to American markets and overwhelmingly Alberta's natural resources. Both of these things Carney has thrown away. Then the USA doesn't need Canada.
Well, and Mark Carney says America changed. Like America changed? No, the West changed, being Europe, Britain, Canada, Australia. Free speech, gone. Hate speech, okay. Mass immigration, bring them all in. Let's erase our own culture and adopt their culture. Let's get rid of private property rights on a provincial level, an international level, and a federal level through UNDRIP laws and the 30 by 30 program. The only countries that changed were all the other countries in the West that were in on this globalist scheme.
That started to break down as Trump came in, which is why it's such an existential threat, and they have to go push harder against him, even though they don't it's the middling powers. They like to call them the middle powers, but no. Sean says, can Canada say they don't need the USA? We will see. And indeed we will. I continue to say it's one of the biggest mistakes that Canada and Canadians make.
Yeah.
Sean also says Carney has learned history. If Guy is right, communism doesn't come from inequalities and capitalism, but from overwhelming poverty and societal atheism, like in Russia and China when they switched.
And again, once he gets that federalization, he's already broken down the barriers for interprovincial work, meaning he can bring in mass immigration and have them undercut what normal citizens would work for. And every future wave of mass immigration will undercut the previous wages of the mass immigrants, driving down the wages, adopting the Chinese model.
Print of Alberta says, yes. Also remember September 1st, the Fed's gas tax will be put back. Another 10 to 15 cents will be back on gas. Diesel prices in Canada. No deal with the U.S. means we will see even higher prices on everything.
Absolutely. There should be no taxes in a free and independent Alberta. And we're going to get into the new constitution and some of the things that were in there. I like some of them. I didn't like other things. That being said, it's a much better situation. Any situation you get in, as long as you can break free from Canada. Yeah. Even if you go worst case scenario and adopt the Westminster system, at least you hit the reset button.
Shauna Vision says Andrew Coyne is a scary character, both ideologically and physically. Yes, I agree. Laurentian elite.
But I do have to say thank you to all these liberals talking about federalization now, because I was like one insane conservative talking about this for a year. Yeah. Even you were saying I was insane. Now the liberals are talking about it. All the mechanisms Mark Carney has already built, they're undoubtedly driving forward for this thing right now.
Well, initially I thought that the plan of federalization and then maybe using that and that money and resources to prop up Europe seemed insane. And then we started seeing the headlines that Canada wanted to join the EU. Sean says, it's funny, up till a little bit ago, I had no idea Canada had internal tariffs and barriers and that the USA never has had since the Articles of Confederation days, but federalism still exists in the USA. Exactly. And thanks to Trump also, we have to say that the trade barriers, interprovincial trade barriers, which was also an insane notion, kind of came down with the whole alcohol thing.
Yeah, and as the federal government starts breaking down the economies of individual provinces, they're going to be able to write into these natural resource contracts a lot of things these provinces would never normally agree to. It's going to be money for power. The money's going to go to the provinces. The power is going to go to the federal government.
Mm-hmm. Option Trader says, alcohol is a smokescreen. This deal was buried because Quebec and your dairy cartel and keeping China out of Canada.
Absolutely.
And Philip Vespa says, I'm worried that floor crossing Danielle Smith will cave and put up oil as a weapon to wield. She must not sabotage the referendum on her way out of the door to federal politics.
She's going to sabotage that second referendum. This first referendum is already off the ground and has legs. It's that second referendum you have to worry about. She already said it was a 2.5 to 3 year process. She made that statement multiple times. Then she started getting booed and jeers when she walked into a room. And then she changed the answer to, oh, you'll get a binding referendum in the spring. If we agree to that, she's going to avoid a leadership review. We will have missed our opportunity to get rid of her and guarantee ourselves a binding referendum. I don't believe a single thing that comes out of her mouth. I don't trust her. She is Jason Kenney 2.0.
Proving to be so, yeah. And with interests up over east into Ottawa. Cindy Melnick says, I have never trusted Carney or this government. I knew that there wouldn't have been a deal. Lisa trusts and warned us. I listened. Option Trader says, Quebec forces a 200% tariff on U.S. dairy products, but Carney wants a 0% tariffs on Canadian products. That is their plan, guy. You saw it coming. Well done, sir.
Well, there used to be 15,000 dairy suppliers, and they were spread out outside of Ottawa and the Laurentian elites. Now I think there's something like 8,500, and they're willing to sacrifice the entire Canadian economy for that. I don't think so. There's something bigger at play behind the scenes.
Option Trader says, won't, quote, accept a deal at any price. What does that mean exactly for Canada? No more trade with the U.S. at all?
Well, they said they didn't want any future threats coming from the Americans. The Mexicans already showed you how to get that. You simply enter into official negotiations and build the mechanism into the contract, period. What Mark Carney is telling the general public, he's able to tell them because he controls the media.
Sheridan says, I pray Canadians now see their politicians don't care about inflation or their standards of living. Albertans choose freedom and leave the plantation called Canada. This is just one more on the reasons why, but you're making it easier for Alberta.
Alberta's going to need to grow a backbone because if he does anything shady in this election, we need to go hard all at once. Yes. Meaning we'll have to oust Danielle Smith, meaning we'll have to get a leader in there that will call a binding referendum and take full control over the mechanisms of those counts. So what's happening right now with Forever Canada and that money trail they won't show, with what's going on with hiring poll counters from outside of Alberta that are potentially non-citizens, won't happen in a binding referendum.
Ellie the Free says, you can't collaborate with the Democrats, hold Democrat events, sell Canada out to China, and then complain about, quote, threats to our sovereignty, you creepy liberal con man.
Yeah.
He is very creepy. And Option Trader says, so will Canada stop supporting American companies, not just alcohol? I mean, I say to all Canadians that are elbows up and Canadian only, see how that works out for you with just buying and using Canadian and then maybe Chinese now.
I don't know. I think Alberta should send a message to America and buy only American. Watch this, the sales skyrocket. Saskatchewan as well. The rest of Canada's cooked. They're probably got their elbows so far up their ass, they're going to continue to buy Canadian booze at double the price.
Sheridan says Cuba-style trade embargo is where Canada is headed if Carney keeps up this nonsense.
Well, what I said is the next moves here.
Because of their own fault.
Trump is not going to give the 6-month notice of the cancellation of the USMCA before the midterms because he wants to keep the economy somewhat stable, even if they are in a trade war. But after those midterms, he's going to probably announce a direct negotiation with Mexico, a bilateral agreement, and then give the cancellation of the USMCA, which takes effect 6 months later. Those have to be the next steps.
Cindy Melnick says, so why doesn't President Trump do an investigation into Carney's assets? I'm done and begin to think that we are working together. I have no faith in our crooked prime minister.
Yeah, Mark Carney very well may be federalizing Canada and investing in natural resources through federalization. So the federal government has complete control over this stuff, not for the Europeans, but potentially for the Americans. That is another potential here, but it's obvious what's going to go on in Canada here right now.
An option trader says Walmart, Costco, Starbucks, Nike, Levi's, Coca-Cola, Amazon, Netflix, HBO Max, essentially everything Canadians use basically. Like on a day-to-day basis will just be cooked.
Well, and America was doing the Canadian public a favor by going after these news cartels as well. A lot of the things they wanted to cook into this negotiation was massively going to benefit Canadian citizens, but not the Canadian government. What the Canadian government now wants is put all the power in their hands, take the power away from the citizens as well as the provinces.
Ellie the Free says, your line was always, quote, Trump is so stupid, imposing tariffs hurts your own country. So why is Carney trying to hurt Canada then? Exactly. And it doesn't, I mean, it's taken a while and it'll continue to take a while. But if the plan, because it might not work, but if Trump's plan works, it might actually strengthen not just the US, but the countries that are actually allied and trading and doing the things that they were supposed to, that Canada was supposed to do.
Somebody needs to ask these trade negotiations or Carney if a conservative reporter can get in there and say, why didn't you ever enter into official trade negotiations like the Mexicans and built in a stopgap mechanism so you wouldn't be subject to future tariffs?
Exactly. On that note, let's actually get into Alberta and the West.
20 years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
The full quote you had to put on there.
Well, that's my favorite movie, and I think it has a lot of similarities to Alberta right now. We need freedom.
But let's start with this from Table Salt saying, quote, new RBC analysis shows Trump's tariffs target almost exclusively liberal voting provinces. He's nuking Carney's base surgical. Estimates of average effective tariff rates by province, and there we see who will get the most and who will get less.
Yeah, the provinces here higher on the scale will be the first to federalize because that's where the tariffs hit the most. It's those retaliatory tariffs that Carney said he's going to implement that will start to affect the other provinces when he wants them to federalize. That's how he's going to target different sets of provinces at different times. He's going to create an economic collapse. One is already going to be created for Quebec as well as Ottawa and those other couple provinces there. But the other ones that aren't affected by these tariffs will be affected by the retaliatory tariffs. Those retaliatory tariffs aren't going to be meant to affect the Americans. It's going to be meant to affect these other provinces. So they come begging for a bailout to the federal government.
Because we already know that, for example, Quebec, BC, Ontario, and Manitoba would probably be on board with already getting into a more federalized plan. But we also have this from Keith Wilson saying, quote, exports to the United States by province. And there we see that Ontario, Alberta, and Quebec are at the highest. The U.S. is the dominant export market for nearly every province.
And Alberta is going to be the tough nut to crack here because they are the golden child right now. The economy is going extremely well. The only way he's going to crack Alberta is if he threatens to cut off the oil to the United States at some point. He's going to not want to do that until after a non-binding referendum if he's able to win. He's not going to do it as long as there's some kind of independence referendum in the works.
But also, using Keith Wilson's point as well that he's been bringing up as of late, it's Alberta's oil, not Canada's oil, and that was already signed. But, I mean, he can use other mechanisms, like the fact that Alberta's oil doesn't go directly into the U.S., even though the U.S. and Trump already had approved a pipeline to be built.
Yeah, because Alberta never attempted to build the pipeline directly to the United States, now they're subject to federal rules and regulations. Every single pipeline passes through Saskatchewan or British Columbia.
And on the need for independence, we also see this from CBC Watchers saying, quote, the Alberta Prosperity Project released a 54-page document entitled The Foundation of Freedom. It proposes an independent Alberta to be led by a president, free passports for citizens, an income tax capped at 10%, and English as the only official language.
Yeah, and this is meant to get the conversation started, and there were a lot of good things in here. The one thing that I didn't agree with was the 10% taxes. It should be zero tax on all citizens, not on medium to large businesses or the natural resource sector. You tax the natural resource sector and large and medium-sized businesses. That's how you build your infrastructure. Citizens, there should be no tax. Most countries with a natural resource profile like Alberta have no taxes on their citizens, period. But I did like most of the things in here. And even that 10% tax, I wasn't able to see if it was 10% on citizens or 10% on businesses. But I think the tax on businesses should be a little bit higher in order to create some kind of chest
Staying in Alberta, where the separation movement is putting its vision on paper. A new discussion document outlines what an independent province could look like, from taxes to government and individual rights. CTV's Mark Villani reports.
Proud Albertans are flying their flags in favor of independence, but one group is sending an even bigger signal, spelling out what separation from Canada could actually look like.
It's designed to get people talking. It's designed to get people thinking that, and it's also designed to get people's input back.
The Alberta Prosperity Project
and pause
released
it there. And again, it's meant to get people talking and to get their input back. My input back would be absolutely fantastic document. I'm kind of glad he went with the American model here, because the three models were the Westminster model or the Canadian system, Bruce Party's more libertarian system that's never been tried before. I really like that system, but it's high risk. Most people understand the American system and understand that is the gold standard today. So I'm glad he went with that when he was pitching this and starting the conversation. Again, another big win from Mitch Sylvester here.
And also highlighting the importance of that citizen engagement that we've seen both during the collection of firms, but also now what we're going to need as we head into October 19th.
4-page document entitled The Foundation of Freedom. It proposes an independent Alberta to be led by a president, free passports for citizens, an income tax capped at 10%, and English as the only official language. 3 levels would form governments, including a leader with veto power, an elected legislative assembly and senate, and elected judges. An elected independent body would also lead the oversight branch, giving it power to access all government documents, run elections, and investigate public complaints.
It's going to help minimize government corruption, of which we have a lot of.
The document also puts a strong emphasis on individual rights, including the right to possess and carry firearms, access and delete personal data held by the state, and choose or refuse healthcare.
It's a scary vision.
The leader of the Forever Canadian movement also took issues with the document's claims.
It's a scary vision. What Mark Carney just did to Canada today, that is a freaking nightmare, and literally working itself out before our eyes. That's a scary vision.
Yeah.
To protect all Albertans from discrimination, including based on, quote, lawful sexual orientation, which isn't defined.
You're looking at a combination of gunslinging Texas with very much oppressive Alabama, where no minority rights are being recognized.
How people identify.
And pause it. And all minority rights are being recognized because it's equal treatment under the law. No specialty groups or classes. We don't want race-based laws or specialty group laws. We want the law to look at everybody the same, equal treatment for everybody. Canada has lost its traditional Western values, and it's giving preferential treatment to some while it's prosecuting others.
Basically now lost its democratic standing with what they did today as well.
Is of little to no concern to me.
But some prominent separatists who are not part of the Alberta Prosperity Project say these ideas don't all fly.
It's getting a bit too detailed for what's a constitutional document. Those are policy positions. We want smaller government. We want less tax. But that's more a discussion between the electors and their government rather than having it, again, enshrined in a constitution, I believe.
Although we think that it's a...
It reset.
Yeah. But I know where we were. We were with Tanya Clemens. Hold on. There we go.
Constitution, I believe.
Although we think that it's a bit premature, once we get to that point in time, it will absolutely be a very important part of the conversation.
A conversation that separatists hope to continue.
They have a chance right now to take charge of their future.
And a future some hope to avoid ahead of the October 19th referendum.
This really takes us back hundreds of years.
Mark Villani, CTV News, Calgary.
We're being taken into communism, you retard.
I don't want the future Canada is offering. I would rather be taken back a couple hundred years than go on the fate that Canada is offering its citizens right now. And although some of the people disagreed that we don't need a constitution right now, we just need to start the conversation and let people know there is a firm idea going forward, because a lot of people are saying, well, you don't have any constitution or you don't have any economic data. Again, Keith Wilson is putting out the white papers. Now we do have a constitutional document, at least to start a conversation. Everything's kind of laid out there so people can feel like they are in good hands, which they are if they vote for independence on October 19th.
Because a big issue has been that fear of the unknown, essentially.
Yeah.
But lastly, on the flip-flopping of Danny Smith, the Globe and Mail says, quote, Smith says Alberta could have a binding referendum on secession in early 2027.
And she says it could have, and this is a complete flip-flop from her 2.5 to 3 years. The reason she's saying this now is to avoid a leadership review. Alberta independence has seen through her. We've been calling for an immediate leadership review after October 19th, because there is a date just after October 19th. We can have that review and oust her. She's trying to avoid that by claiming we could have a binding referendum. If it's left up to Danielle Smith, the Federalist, we're never going to have that. It's going to be 2.5 or 3 years down the road. And if you agree to that timeline, we are going to be absolutely trapped by these mechanisms of federalization and backroom dealings.
And I also think she wants to avoid it because she has her eyes set on Ottawa and she doesn't want anything compromising that or maybe making her less popular.
Yeah.
Even less popular. Okay, let's go back to your comments and then we'll head into Carney and the Liberals. Sean says, why would ending trade barriers inside Canada do anything? It won't replace losing access to the USA. No, it won't. But they think it is because they have to now start relying on themselves, which they can't. And the guy wants to answer it, so I guess we'll wait for him. Sean also says, it's so funny, I did some research for the never materialized NAFTA replacement, AFTA, in the late 90s and had no idea Canada had internal tariffs. I don't think it's common knowledge. No, it's not. Should be more common knowledge because it's a stupid way to deal with things. 416 Shauna Vision says 16 liters of cheap wine in Ontario is $110, but in Prince Edward Island it's $180. If trade barriers on alcohol fell, PEI residents would buy from Ontario and the revenue in PEI would fall. This is one example.
Well, the trade barriers are much more insidious to this. Yes, there will be some good benefits to it, but it puts the federal government at the center of a lot of different regulations. Again, it gives a lot of power to the federal government. Although I want to see interprovincial trade barriers come down, that's only the first layer of federalization mechanisms that are going to go forward. And again, that does put the federal government at the center of the spoke, and all the provinces have to work for the federal government when they want something. And at any point, the federal government can put more onerous regulations on interprovincial trade.
Sean says, it's funny because Marxism would seem antithetical to a monarchy, but it seems to accelerate it under the right monarchy. And again, it is because the mechanisms are built that way and under a thing like the Westminster system, which a lot of Commonwealth countries are under, which we're now seeing turn into insane socialism on their way towards communism. Well, maybe it's because it allows it.
Well, no, it doesn't allow it, actually. Mark Carney flipped it on its head, and the system is not working the way it is supposed to do. And the mechanisms that are supposed to stop a lot of the stuff aren't working either, because the judiciary and all these other branches are ideologically captured right now. A lot of the power is supposed to lie at the local and provincial level. Mark Carney is placing that at the federal level, and now he wants to enshrine that when he starts giving these bailouts, I believe.
And Yoholo, I guess, says Canada 51st state incoming. It would, and we've talked about the ironic possibility of maybe Alberta becoming independent and then Canada having to become the 51st state.
Well, I think Canada is beginning to become a resource colony of the United States or potentially even the EU at some point. Alberta has a real opportunity to break free, stand on its own 2 feet. It has a safety net built in. Canada would take Alberta back in a heartbeat. At this point, the direction Canada is going, I don't even think that is a safety net, but the United States is right there and would welcome Alberta in if we fell on our face and absolutely failed. But there's no reason we should fail with all the economic components that we already have built into Alberta with the natural resources, whether it's oil, gas, or mining.
Ray Davis says EB is selling out the First Nations to China. Well, I think they're using the First Nations to both to China, but also to, once again, further the control of private property by the federal government and then selling it out to them as well.
Well, if the province actually has control over all of its land, it controls its natural resource development. If they can divide up the land between First Nations and the province, the federal government becomes the middleman and can then put in regulations or then broker deals in putting more power into the federal government's hands.
Philip Vespa says, you would expect our opposition, oh, hold on, I lost it. You would expect our opposition to provide some resistance, but PP has his elbows up too. We must stand united, has killed any hope for conservatives in Eastern Canada. Alberta is the last hope. And yeah, PP, as Pierre Poilievre has put his elbows, I think he's elbows deep in Mark Carney's behind at this point.
Well, what Pierre Poilievre is, yes, he has some different fundamental base values, but when it comes to federalization, it's going to be a liberal, conservative uniparty when it comes to that particular issue. Mark Carney will build the mechanisms, push it as far as he can. If he can't finish it and there's a lot of backlash to him, he'll simply either step down or get voted out. The conservative will come in. The mechanisms are already built and the conservative will finish off federalization and people will cheer it on under a conservative government because Canada will be in absolute dire straits by that point.
Yes. Ray Davis says he sold out the Hudson Bay to China. Canoe sold out the Hudson Bay to China.
Canoe is just, it's like he's a Siamese twin of Mark Carney at this point.
Yes,
They're best buddies.
A lot of them are. Sheridan says Canadian politicians don't care about Canadian standards of living and inflation. They all support socialism, all parties, and because it benefits them to have the furthering of control.
Yeah, people are going to wake up when the doors of mass immigration open back up at the end of 2027 and 2028.
Yoho says Alberta leaving on October, so yes, hopefully so. Again, go out, vote. Do it. Option Trader says your CBC lies to you, so Canadians don't even know about interprovincial tariffs. That wine vendor broke that story on TV that Canadian alcohol costs more than U.S. wine on Canadian shelves.
One of the reasons, because they said they wanted to take down interprovincial trade barriers, but when they got into talks, the federal government kept placing themselves in the center of everything, and they were the go-between. They were the middleman that got to set a lot of the regulations, taxes, and other things. So the provinces kind of backed out. But now with an economic collapse going to start kind of imminently in Canada, a lot of these provinces are going to be absolutely desperate, and they're going to put the federal government at the middle intentionally. And in return, they're going to get a bailout.
Sheridan says, rest in peace to the Canadian dollar and hello to the great Canadian peso.
And I think I'm expecting on Monday.
The Mexican peso is going to do a lot better, actually.
Well, I'm expecting on Monday for the Canadian dollar to begin its collapse and
further collapse.
If people have an opportunity to get out, meaning they're not living in Alberta, but they're living in the rest of the Canadas, now's the time to do it before the Canadian dollar does collapse, because that's going to trap a lot of people in the country.
That too. Holden says, that's why I call him Carl with a K, Marks. I hope people will wake up and understand. Unfortunately, I've seen too many comments in comment sections on his announcement, etc., of elbows up, retards or bots, saying that this was great and that, yes, we should have to push back and fight back against the U.S. They don't understand. They're fully dooming themselves.
They do understand. Liberals have done nothing but talk about they do not want a trade deal with Donald Trump. When this was rumored, this is all the liberal independent media stations were talking about on YouTube, but they were pairing it with one thing, and that was federalization. That was the mechanisms that would save Canada and give liberals even more power.
Yeah. And just quickly, Tal Talks, hello, and thank you for being here, says howdy again, Nat and Guy. And on that talk about liberals, let's actually go see what they're up to.
Liberal, happy fun, la la la.
But before we even get into that, thank you so much, Max, from Freedom Calendar. If you don't follow Freedom Calendar, go follow him. He actually records a lot of the events or streams a lot of the events and is doing a great service for Alberta independence and the historical recording of Alberta independence and the movement. But thank you so much for the 1024 super chat saying elbows up. Yeah.
More like ankles up at this point for the Liberals.
And, well, they're elbows deep in a bunch of stuff. But now let's get actually into the elbows up of Carney that fully flourished today. Mark Carney saying, quote, "My statement on the Canada-U.S. trade negotiations." Do you want me to read it?
Yeah, I want you to read it all, and I'm going to get you to stop periodically.
Okay. Let me try to see if I can put it on screen. That's as best as I can get it. But over the past 18 months, Canada's new government has focused, basically the same one as it before, has focused on building our strength at home, diversifying our partnerships abroad, and striking a fair deal with the United States. Our objectives in our trade negotiations have been to, one, preserve tariff-free access to the U.S. for the vast majority of Canadian businesses, provide greater stability.
Stop. He wants to provide tariff-free access to the United States while tariffing the United States. He doesn't want to take down his own tariffs. He just wants to make sure the United States doesn't tariff Canada.
Yeah. 2, provide greater stability to our trade relationship. 3, significantly reduce U.S. tariffs on our key strategic industries so that Canadian businesses in these sectors would have the best access of any in the world. They already kind of did. 3, protect our small and medium businesses, the lifeblood of our economy, including by removing the imminent threat of new tariffs, which you almost completely bundled now. And 4, maintaining our flexibility, independence, and sovereignty so we can keep building.
And again, if this was his objectives in negotiations, why did he never enter into official negotiations? This is your objectives, yet you never actually entered into official negotiations. Well, the Mexicans did. If you enter into official negotiations, you can build in a mechanism called a stopgap where they cannot threaten future tariffs. This null and voids all the talking points from the Liberals of how do we stop Trump from tariffing us in the future? Well, you build in the mechanisms once you step into official negotiations. Carney never did that. This is a bunch of rubbish at this point.
Continues, we have recognized from the beginning that America has changed and that we will not return to our old relationship. Our government understood before many that America is altering all its trade relationships, putting tariffs on its closest allies and charging for access to its vast market. We have worked in that context to strike a fair deal that would provide the best access to the U.S. market and greater certainty to Canadian businesses and workers. Throughout, our goal has been to secure the best deal for Canadians, never a deal at any price on any deadline. And we weren't even talking.
And Mark Carney likes to talk about the $100 billion of investment that's coming into Canada. Nearly half of that is from Americans buying up Canadian businesses. Ask yourself why they're doing that. Probably to relocate them to the United States or to hollow out Canada from the inside out.
Continues.
They're not building, it's not new, fresh investment that's building the economy. It's literally giving. We can keep going there.
Okay, continues. In recent weeks, we have made important progress toward improving Canada's position as having the best deal in the world with the U.S. However, that progress has not been enough to meet our objectives for Canadians. As a result, this evening, I have decided to suspend trade negotiations with the U.S. and have directed Canada's negotiators to return to Ottawa. They have worked hard in good faith for a week to defend the interests of Canadians throughout these negotiations up until the very last minute. However, last-minute changes in the U.S. proposed terms were unfair, uneconomic, and called into question the reliability of any deal. At midnight tonight, the U.S. intends to impose a 50% tariff on roughly $28 billion of Canadian goods. Canada will match those tariffs dollar for dollar to protect our workers and businesses. In the coming days, the government will introduce additional measures to support Canadian workers and businesses, building on the nearly $25 billion in support provided over the past 18 months.
And when he's talking about these additional measures, he's going to be giving out loans to businesses. The first round of loans are going to seem like rescue loans. Then they're going to need more loans. When they come for those secondary or third round of loans, he's going to give the loans out for percentages of companies. And then he's going to continue to give out loans for larger and larger percentages of companies till the federal government probably owns 51% of the companies they want to own. They're going to do the same thing to the provinces. When it comes to individual citizens, I'm expecting some kind of UBI to be the bailout for them. This is the ushering in of socialism.
That does sound familiar.
This is a bunch of BS that he's talking about here. He was never in negotiations officially.
No. continues. These actions complement Canada's core economic strategy. From day one, we have been focused on building our strength at home and diversifying our partnerships abroad. That strategy.
Okay, and you can leave it there. And he's not strengthening at home because he's selling to Canadian companies to foreign investors at this point.
But next, CBC Watcher says, quote, Ian Lee cuts through the noise on the trade breakdown, saying the price is whether we have continued open access to our largest trading partner, literally next door. The U.S. sits at $32 trillion GDP. China is a distant second and 10,000 kilometers away. And yet we want to continue to strengthen our bond with China. Hold on. There we go.
Ian Lee is an associate professor at the Sprott School of Business at Carleton University, joining us this morning from Toronto. Ian, so much reaction to this, but I want to start first with Prime Minister Carney saying he's going to match that 50% tariff dollar for dollar. What do you make of his approach?
Well, look, I understand the political reasoning and the political logic. Canadians are very, very angry. It's showing in the polls. I understand that. Having said that, retaliatory tariffs have been studied extensively over many, many years, decades. And the first thing to note is the retaliatory tariffs will fall on Canadians. They will fall on American goods coming into Canada, but they are paid by Canadian businesses, Canadian importers, and ultimately passed on through the cost of the goods and services to Canadians.
And pause it for a second. And this is what they said about Trump's tariffs in the beginning, but that wasn't the case because America has such a large market. The people that wanted access to the market actually ate the majority of those tariffs. Canada has such a small market. The Canadian people are the ones that are going to be forced to pay the tariff. That's the difference between an American tariff and a Canadian tariff. And when it's a retaliatory tariff, this is going to put a big hurt on the Canadian people directly from its government.
And the FAO in Ontario, the Financial Accountability Office, sort of a PBO of Ontario, found that it was going to drive up prices for Canadians in Ontario. It was going to drive up unemployment, and there were going to be increased bankruptcies. So this is not going to be a free lunch for Canadians. This is going to be very costly. Understood the reasons, but it's still going to be very costly for us in Canada.
So businesses, consumers feeling the impact here in Canada, also being felt, of course, for consumers and businesses on the south of the border. So what do you think changed here? Because it seemed like they were close to a deal, and then talks collapsed between both sides less than an hour before the midnight deadline.
Exactly. So I read the New York Times analysis of one of the authors, a very distinguished Canadian journalist, and there were three journalists writing the coverage, and they were very careful, very neutral. But there seemed to be a suggestion that the deal on the table was a bridge too far for Canada because it was Canada that pulled out. Canada walked away, and it seems to have been around the issue of tariffs for both steel and auto. These are very sensitive industries. I understand that, especially in Ontario.
Okay, and you can leave it there. And again, they keep pitching it like Canada was in this big trade negotiation. I can't say it enough times. They never entered official negotiations like Mexico did. If they did, they wouldn't have been subject to threats of a new tariff.
And almost nobody is explaining that, except that one professor we saw yesterday, which we will watch again today. But also, someone that is invested in the U.S. and that does care about the U.S. markets is Carney himself. Moose on the Loose says, quote, Mark Carney is 91% invested in America and is milking Canada dry.
He knows he's going to have to collapse the Canadian economy in order to achieve federalization. That's why he does not want his investments in Canada right now. It's going to hurt Canadians, but it's going to massively benefit Americans. His money is sitting there because he wants to achieve two goals. He wants to get rich, but he also wants to federalize Canada at the same time. He's going to have those two objectives work together. That's obvious at this point.
Do you want me to go through each of them or zoom in more?
No, I just wanted to point out that he is 91% invested in the United States.
If you want to look at that graph, you can go to Moose on the Loose on X. And lastly, just the obvious Canadian karma says, quote, Mark Carney rejecting Trump's reasonable offer means the Gordie Howe Bridge Canadians built and America owns half of it now will mainly be used one way, reshoring and moving companies to America. The middle class is going to be destroyed in Canada. Canadians can expect more breadlines, debt, and poverty. And we've already been talking for the past few months about businesses leaving Canada and announcing that they're leaving, both because they can't do business properly in Canada, but also even because of censorship. Like a lot of VPN companies have already announced that they're leaving.
And if you're wondering if more companies are going to leave, yes, because all that investment Mark Carney keeps bragging about that's coming into Canada is coming from Americans literally just buying up Canadian businesses because they want to reshore them into America. All the writing is on the wall. These businesses that are already leaving is nothing compared to what's about to come.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the Americans point out very often, why did a lot of the auto manufacturing leave from America into Canada? Because there was they didn't have the same kind of union regulations within Canada.
Mm-hmm. But let's go back to your comments before we head into the elbows up east, which I'm sure they're celebrating right now. Especially Ford. Yoholo says, Chinese Communist Party infiltration and from India make Canada a national security risk, which is why I continuously also say that the Canadian passport is losing a lot of its status, especially within the US. They're already seeing that a lot of people are entering into Canada and even becoming citizens or PR holders just as a way to get into the US.
And a lot of people don't understand 60% of the immigrants coming into Canada are coming from one country, and that is India. That's not acceptable. You need to if you're going to have immigration, which I don't even know if we should have immigration at this point, but if you're going to have it, you need to diversify that immigration, especially if you're going to erase your own history and own culture, because this is a recipe to have your culture replaced by the Indian culture.
Yes. Sean says, it's funny how an American helped found Prince Rupert because of the need for a Pacific port ideally placed to access Asia and has been effectively neutered by Carney and the First Nations. Sean also says, the tariffs Carney will implement will destroy the province of Prince Edward Island. I don't know why Sean is always very fixated on PEI.
Well, maybe he lives there.
No, he lives in Oregon.
Oh.
Sean says many of the foreign corporations doing business in Canada do so in order to have access to the American markets. Carney pushing immigration seeks to transform Canada to the USA Junior, but it won't work because they don't have the actual market that a lot of these other companies and investments actually want to take advantage of. Exactly. Option Trader says, look at the numbers. Europe runs on natural gas from Russia. Who exactly does the elbows up crowd think is going to buy heavy crude? The world runs on light crude.
Well, and this is another thing here. When Carney finally gets around to Alberta after he federalizes a lot of these other provinces, the only way to do it is to shut off that frickin' oil pipeline through Saskatchewan or any other province that runs through, like British Columbia. In order to cripple Alberta and force them into economic failure and federalization as well.
Oh no, a comment that I wanted disappeared. But Tim Burns said, hold on, because Tim Burns said that Europe is collapsing too, and why would Canada want to hitch its wagon to Europe? But you have a theory.
Yeah, Canada is meant to be the savior of Europe. If Canada can federalize its natural resources, the amount of wealth in those natural resources would actually bail out this global utopia that they've been scheming up. Donald Trump threw a monkey wrench into that. They had to retool it. I think the retooling was the natural resources within Canada. It was originally actually supposed to be the natural resources of Russia, but that strategy kind of went out the window.
And Option Trader says this imaginary customer base doesn't really readily exist. Carney can talk tough, but the oil reality doesn't match. And who's going to buy it? Tall Talk says the refining process for sweet versus sour crude is substantially different enough that refineries cannot easily switch.
Yeah.
And Sheridan says...
Oh, that's what I was going to say. If Canada ever decides to play extremely tough because they want to collapse the Albertan economy and shut off the oil to the Americans can already diversify. They've already begun that diversification through Venezuela. They have massive regulations on Russia as well. They can simply take down some of those regulations if they wanted. If they needed more oil because Canada cut them off, they have the Strait of Hormuz they can negotiate a deal with. They can also negotiate a deal with Russia. So Canada cutting off the oil to America is not the big power play Canada thinks it is, because everybody's willing to deal with the Americans, including their enemies.
Sheridan says, hell no, the Westminster system and monarchy are anti-freedom and prosperity. If you want to drink from the bosom of freedom and liberty, leave the monarchy and the Westminster system. Exactly. That's why we continuously say it's not a good idea. Sorry, we have a lot of comments. Ray Davis says, carbon capture is a perpetual tax on an income stream for corporate skimming, a tax on everything funded by taxpayers for skimming corporations. Exactly. And Ellie the Free says, hopefully Alberta is sick of being a resource colony. Hopefully, whether for Ottawa or the EU, how about we take back our own future? And it's coming up close, and we can really use this decision, this retardation from Mark Carney, to push more people into maybe hopefully seeing the light. I don't know if they will.
Yeah, and it's fine to be a resource colony if it was benefiting the country itself and the citizens and the infrastructure for those citizens. But Alberta's going to see none of that, even if they get pipelines, even if they get mining development contracts for the Rocky Mountains and things like that. All the money's going to be going to the federal government because it's going to be taxed off of the top, not off of the profits at the end.
Option Trader says bitumen needs chemical processing to separate the oil from the clay, then needs a cooking process to get the raw heavy crude, then pumped through a heavy crude refinery. And Tal Talk says freedom for Alberta, now more than ever. And Holden says Carl's Canada is in a really bad way. It's about to find itself in turmoil. And one of those sectors that might find itself most in turmoil, funnily and ironically enough, is the East. So let's go into elbows up East. Canada. Let's start with this from Mark Nixon saying, quote, meltdown alert. And this is from yesterday. So.
And again, this is our elbows up East section. So this is a lot of the reactions from the Liberals, but also a lot of Conservatives who have their elbows up these days as well.
Mm-hmm. But this secret recording, this Jamil Billy elegy, like, do we think that was secretly recorded or do we think that was strategically recorded? Because how do these comments by the vice president at a U.S. fundraiser magically end up in the hands of the Canadian press? Right. Isn't that an interesting chain of events and series of custody? It's almost like somebody wanted to suck up to Trump, denigrate Mark Carney, dismiss Pierre Poilievre, and praise the random MP who spoke at my wedding, not me, but J.D. Vance's wedding, in a way that makes him look helpful and useful, the other guy weak, and the other guy not relevant. So it seems like a play to help Mr. Giovanni raise his profile. But this is
the crazy conspiracy theory. They're saying, well, how did J.D. Vance's comments actually make it into the Canadian media? Everybody has a cell phone at these events. There's reporters at these events as well. They're reported on, and then they're re-reported on until they make it into the Canadian news. This happened with Trump as well at a fundraiser when Obama said, well, he'll never be president. And then that's one of the sparking moments. Trump decided to run for president, actually. But that was at a fundraiser as well. A lot of these fundraiser comments actually do make their way into the media. So these conspiracy theories they're trying to make up, they're just butthurt over the comments.
But also, I was going to say, that was yesterday. And instead of focusing on the dire situation that Canada was heading into, also at that point, they decide to go into gossip and speculation and etc. because that is the media you have. They will never try to even tell you what's going on fully and the truth.
Well, you have to understand there are two Conservatives kind of setting themselves apart with a different strategy from the rest. That is Danielle Smith and Jamil Giovanni. Now, I don't personally like Danielle Smith, but both of them are saying we should not have dollar for dollar tariffs and we should not be doing certain things. With this, I believe, uniparty strategy of federalization, they want to make sure they have two populists they can put in there if they need to in order to push federalization over the finish line after Mark Carney.
A conservative that's not doing that is Jason Kenney. As Relevant says, quote, Jason Kenney being clipped and promoted by a Soros-funded U.S. super PAC.
And again, Conservatives as well as Liberals have their elbows up on tariff trades right now because the big play going on behind the scenes is federalization, I believe. So I don't think you're going to see much of a difference between Conservatives or Liberals.
I think what the Prime Minister is trying to balance is his commitment to Canadians to defend aggressively our interests, but create a space of some stability, knowing full well that based on past actions, the Trump administration might just do a 180 all over again. So I think what the prime minister is trying.
And again, this is the major talking point, not just coming from Jason Kenney, but the Liberals, that we can't trust Mark Carney because he's just going to keep tariffing us, even if we do go into negotiations. Mechanisms in the contracts actually prevent that from happening if you enter into official negotiations.
Let's go see Wab Canoe also commenting. Israel Levant says, I don't think Trump knows who Wab Canoe is. He's really no different from a million internet trolls. But if I were Canoe, I might be more careful about the personal attacks.
And this is Trump derangement syndrome to the max here.
Essentially.
So that we can see a change from the American people who hopefully by now see that Donald Trump is the worst thing that's ever happened to your pocketbook in history. Gas prices are higher than ever because of the war in Iran.
And pause it. He's saying Donald Trump is the worst thing for the pocketbook. Well, what about Canada? He needs to be looking at Canada because Canada is off the charts in economic devastation right now. Well, America is actually, when you compare it comparatively to every other country, including China, they're doing fantastically well.
Prices at the grocery store are higher than ever because of his domestic policies. And now he continues to add to your cost of living woes by bringing in more tariffs, which is a tax on you. It's a tax on you as the American people. So again, I think everybody knows he's not trustworthy. He broke his promise on egg prices a long time ago, and now he continues to undermine any credibility that he had on the cost of living. And the worst part about it, even like the MAGA hat wearing American crowd should realize, is that he doesn't care. He's out there talking about like let them eat cake type of comments. He's not in touch. He doesn't care about the American people and the cost of living. He only cares about making his family richer.
And I don't understand how
literally could be talking about Carney right there.
I don't understand how you're going to be talking about cost of living and all these things when Canada is off the charts 10 times worse than America right now. And that's before retaliatory tariffs come in from the United States or the USMCA is canceled or any number of other things. These politicians have driven Canada into the absolute ground.
Do you want me to keep playing?
No, that's
Are we
pretty
done
good.
with the Canoe? Okay. And lastly, from Ezra Levant as well, saying, quote, if I were an Ontario auto worker, I'd be terrified of this man.
President Trump, he can't be trusted. Simple as that. He changes the deal. He keeps moving the goalpost. You know, let me tell you about President Trump. President Trump is the type of person that would steal your lunch money the first day. He'd steal the toque off your head the second day, and the third day he'd steal your running shoes. He is not to be trusted whatsoever. We need to stay united. But folks, I have to run to the meeting.
Have you heard from any of the governors? Have you heard from any of the governors that you've been working with over the last year and a half? How are they reacting?
And you know, that's what I feel bad. Because there's a lot of governors, a lot of American people that are going to get hurt that actually support Canada, and they don't support attacking their closest ally.
And you can pause it for a second. And those same governors he's talking about are usually the northern border governors that get a lot of economic advantages from Canada. What they're going to start realizing over the next few months as this thing escalates, especially if the USMCA is completely canceled and that 6-month notice is given, they're going to see a lot of businesses relocate from Canada to those northern states, which I don't think there's going to be as much resistance as he thinks. That's number one. But number two, he keeps saying Trump's going to change the deal. Again, the Mexicans simply built it into the negotiations where they weren't subject to future tariffs.
But if you look at the numbers, folks, President Trump numbers are down. He ran on creating jobs. We created more jobs than all 350 million people in the U.S. combined last month, just Ontario alone. Inflation's going up. Cost of goods are going up. And I'll tell you the reason they're going up. Because he's attacking his closest ally, his number one customer. You notice cost of housing is going up because 1/3 of the lumber they use to build homes comes from Canada.
It's insane how delusional this really is. I mean, when you hear them, what reality are they living in?
I used to work right along the border, and there's this one street. It has a fence on the one side, and those are American homes in Washington State, and the other side was Canadian homes. And I decided to go online to see the price difference: $1.5 million on one side, and $300,000 to $400,000 on the other side. Almost the exact same home, identically. Prices may be going up in the United States a little bit more, but prices are 70% cheaper in the United States. Food costs are way cheaper, and everything is cheaper in the United States.
And I didn't want to miss this comment, so I highlighted it because otherwise, thank you so much to everybody that is commenting so much. We're going back into your comments and then into the conservatives. Tyler Robinson says, hi, Nan and Guy. What was the last minute changes? Why did Carney withdrew? All I heard was tariff dollar for dollar. I'm guessing you're getting here a bit later, but
Yeah,
You could
I've kind of explained it a few times, but I had predicted on yesterday's show, which was 6 hours before midnight, while everybody else was talking about, well, let's see what's in let's see what's in this tariff deal. I said, I think Carney's going to pull out. I think either he's going to sabotage it or one of the premiers will sabotage it shortly after. I believe he never wanted a deal. He wants federalization. We showed a clip earlier of liberals talking about we need to not have any negotiations with the Americans and we need to move into federalization. I've been talking a lot about federalization, but so have the liberals. And that's their strategy behind the scenes. And when asked how would they achieve federalization, what they said is if there is an economic hurt for the provinces will want bailouts from the federal government. The federal government will then give bailouts in exchange for federalization and more federal power. They're calling it Pierre Trudeau 2.0 strategy implemented by Mark Carney. So I think this was always the game plan.
Yes, but thank you, Dal Robinson. And just quickly, Option Trader says, Carney has not secured any foreign investment. MOUs he got are all promises to talk about doing business and maybe buy the fighter jets. Carney calls that deals and the media parrots his lies.
And again, he did get some foreign investment, but the foreign investment that came in was mainly from Americans in the tune of $50 billion, buying up Canadian companies, I believe, to relocate them to the United States. This is a typical play that happens in the UK a lot as well. A lot of people say if you want to get rich in the UK stock market, you find a company that the Americans are likely to buy.
Mm-hmm. And thank you so much for the $5 Rumble rant from Christu saying, quote, Alberta, free and independent. Thank you for the great show and thank you for all your thank you all for your company this gorgeous Saturday. Thank you for being here and thank you so much for the $5 Rumble rant. And hold on, Ray Davis says Carney has all the power to get Canada moving with C5. He won't. And Talk says the dairy price management cartel totals around 9,000 dairy farmers. Talk about the flea wagging the tail, wagging the whole dog.
Yeah, and I talked about that earlier. It used to be 15,000 dairy suppliers. Now it's about 8,500, that's nothing. And they're willing to sacrifice the entire Canadian economy. Obviously, there's a bigger strategy going on behind the scenes.
Doug Robinson says Carney in his press speech said Ottawa will subsidize affected tariff businesses by $25 billion, the exact same amount Ottawa siphons off from every Albertan.
Well, and again, when he's talking about subsidizing these companies and giving bailouts to provinces, the first round of bailouts and subsidies will probably come with no strings attached. Then they'll come back for their second and third round, and then you'll have to give up a percentages of your companies, and you'll have to give up freedoms as provinces. And this is how you get federalization. This is how you get communism, not just in the public sector, but the private sector as well. These bailouts are the mechanism for the federal government to get power invested into itself.
Talk says Australia and New Zealand eliminated their dairy cartels around 25 years ago with some subsidies, so there are simple solutions with precedents. Also, if you know about the U.S. history, the government cheese, basically very similar to that story. Although they didn't have cartels per se for dairy. But Sheridan Best says a republic where the people are governed by the people, not unelected officials like in Canada, and where the state recognizes your rights, that your rights come from God, not from man or monarchy.
Well, you're going to expect grocery prices to go through the roof in Canada now. And when they do, what are Canadians going to do? They're going to go across the border for day trips and buy their groceries in the United States.
And Sean asks, why is Forever Canada fronted by a Polish communist? Poland is growing and getting richer, and we got the worst booted from the new Europe superpower of Poland. But I'm guessing, he's from the former ideas, and that's why he's bringing to Canada. And that's why he loves Canada so much.
Let's go into the next section here. We'll get back to comments after.
Yes, let's get into the conservatives.
Now, a party election broadcast by the Conservative Party.
Because they're now basically the exact same thing as the Liberals. Stephen Taylor says, quote, Fox News' Hewitt saying Canada is losing 100,000 permanent Canadians per year. Mark Carney is a smooth-talking banker, but he's driving Canada into the ground.
Breaking news overnight. Of course, this tariff fight with Canada continues. What are your thoughts on that this Saturday morning?
This Saturday morning, I'm wondering about whether or not Canada has the will to really get into a knockdown, drag out with it. They're losing 100,000 permanent Canadians a year. Opportunity is collapsing. They've had 20 years of bad governance up north. And Mark Carney's a very smooth-talking banker, but he's driving Canada into the ground. I don't think President Trump is inclined to let him have a good deal. I think he's inclined to say, let's do a fair deal. And Americans up in the northern part They want Canada to come to terms and to stop having a one-way deal. And so I think the Americans will be behind the president on the trade deal with Canada.
Breaking news.
And that's the thing. And I put that clip in there because the Americans don't really give a shit. And it's hard to find a clip of the Americans reacting to this stuff today as well. This is life and death for the Canadians. For Americans, it's like a fly on their shoulder. It's nothing at this point.
And that's what I was saying about the real impact that Canada can have with their little tariffs and their little elbows up on the actual American economy.
Well, and for every little irritant the Canadians want to try to implement on the Americans have 10 times the leverage they can implement on the Canadians. At any point, they can give the 6-month notice, and that is going to collapse Canada if they pull out of the USMCA.
And it's more than 100,000 people, permanent actual Canadians leaving. Last year in 2025 as a whole, it was more than 120,000 people left.
Well, that's
mostly for the US.
That's 120,000 officially that announced to the government they're leaving. Many people just leave the country and never say a word.
Exactly. So they're not counted. But Antonio tweet says, quote, more than 60,000 Christians reportedly marched through the streets of Toronto in a huge public display of faith, filling parts of the city with worshippers carrying crosses, banners, and Christian symbols.
Yeah, and this was absolutely fantastic to see. And Alberta is the most Christian place in Canada. Now, although this didn't happen in Alberta, it is time to stand up. There is a war on Christianity in Canada without a shadow of a doubt across a lot of the West as well.
Yep. Ask all the burned churches.
But when you see little protests go on, they try to make them look as big as possible. They didn't have to do that with this. It's as far as the eye can freaking see. Okay, and you can leave it there. And again, it's time to stand up. Alberta needs to stand up to save Western values, to save Western culture. Canada is trying to erase that right now. That was a very good protest to kind of watch.
And can be done by, for example, let Alberta decide saying we've tried the same path for years. Albertans already know where it leads. It's time to open the door to something better. Vote option 2 on October 19th because Alberta can do better, especially after what we're seeing right now from the Canadian government.
Yeah, and I disagree with this a little bit, but it's a great sentiment. I think you're not on a hamster wheel here. Things are about to dramatically change in Canada. It's not the same old, same old. It's going to get a million times worse over the next 24 to 36 months. Take option 2 before it does get a lot worse. This is no longer an option about, oh, it's the same old Canada. It's going to stay in the same place, or we can risk freedom with Alberta. No, Canada is going to be an absolute economic devastation. Let's hit the door now while we still can.
Yes. And again, it's great that it's coming so close. That we're getting so close to the first referendum vote. Yukon Strong says, quote, important reminder, 2 days ago, PP Pierre Poilievre was ready to blow the trade agreement up over the dairy cartel too. If he had been elected, it would be no different because he's an elbows up liberal too. And again, right now has he's elbows deep in Mark Carney's behind, in my opinion.
And if I'm right about federalization, you're not going to see any difference in strategy between the Liberals and the Conservatives. This is the big play that they both agree on. They both want this for the future of Canada, and it is not a good thing. It's good for the federal government. It is not good for the people or the provinces or freedom within Canada in any way, shape, or form. Now, Poilievre will come off distinctively different with different cultural issues, but when it comes to federalization and what the strategy should be going against America right now, they're going to be in lockstep.
If they're going to be an unreliable trade partner, we've got to find ways to sell more to ourselves and more to the rest of the world.
Do you see it as a dollar for dollar retaliation?
I would say so, yeah. It has to hit hard. And again, we have to be very pinpoint and surgical to make sure we're maximizing impact on the American side while minimizing impact on our side.
You talk about
if they're going to be an
and he's been saying this for a long time. Like, it shouldn't really surprise anybody, and which is why I've been also really criticizing him hard.
Well, but he's saying the exact same thing Carney is. Carney's saying dollar for dollar tariffs, and what he is saying is we have to be very strategic on what counter tariff measures we put on. Why are they saying this? Because they're going to want to target different provinces with different counter tariff measures in order to break their economies, so they come to the federal government for bailouts.
But now let's go back to your comments before we head into the last segment, which is the economic cliff, before we head into RUMBLE. Print of Alberta says, yep, LOL, bent over bozos have no clue. I applied to be a scrutineer for October 19th, 2026 referendum. Good. Says, I think I had confirmation from the UCP. I am waiting for more emails this week.
Oh, absolutely fantastic.
Rage Against Machine says, what a load of BS. Carney planned it this way.
Yeah. And that's what I've been saying for quite a while. And I even said it on yesterday's show when everybody was saying, oh, let's look at the deal. I said, I don't think the deal's going through.
Yeah. Sean said, Sean explaining why he loves PEI, saying, I just love Prince Edward Island because it's geographically ridiculous as a province. Fair enough. And Sean says, so I'm guessing why Guy had interest in the railway between Russia and Alaska would potentially not only lead to prosperity to Russia, but Canada as well, dilute the EU authoritarianism, break the PRC too.
Absolutely. There's a lot of things why I believe if you can repair relations between the United States and Russia, it is a good thing. Driving a wedge between Russia and and China is an absolute necessity at this point. But you need to drive a wedge through economic cooperation, as well as Russia can put a lot of leverage on the globalists by offering them cheap energy in exchange for a change in a lot of their policies.
Rage Against Machine, always with the quotes, as the road ahead will challenge us. It will test our resolve, our loyalty to one another, our belief in what we can become, but we will not falter. Alberta must separate now.
Yeah, it's becoming very, very clear. And I think it's going to be very clear to a lot of people, even if they thought they were going to vote against independence. I think they're going to stay home now. I think this really helped us out in a lot of different ways. The problem is what's rearing its ugly head is the way they're conducting this election. Where are they getting the poll counters? Why are things happening different in this election than other elections? Where is Forever Canada's money coming from?
Sean says, egg prices are far cheaper under Trump, slick-haired, creepy dude.
Yeah, and that was the crazy thing. When he brought up egg prices were extremely high when Trump got in because of Joe Biden and because they were having to slaughter a lot of chickens because of the bird flu. But Trump made a point to bring egg prices down, and he did. I don't think Wab Canoe got the memo there. Egg prices in Canada are far, far higher than in the United States.
Yeah, and Sean says, if you want prosperity for Alberta, even if you want to stay in Canada, you must vote yes for an official vote this October. And exactly, right now you have the chance to at least use it to send a message, but at least go and vote if you're thinking that this might be an issue.
And again, once we get past the non-binding referendum, then we get after the binding referendum and we vote to separate from Canada, you better believe Canada is going to be in an absolute economic freefall. They're not going to want to let Alberta leave. We have to prepare ourselves, our neighbors, and all of Alberta for a potential that we may have to make a unilateral declaration of independence. And we're going to need the U.S. president to recognize us as the country. Right now, that's Trump. After Trump, the best candidate that would recognize us is most likely J.D. Vance.
Sheridan says bondholders will eventually dump the Canadian dollar. The Bank of Canada will be forced to print once bondholders dump the Canadian dollar, and inflation will happen like never seen before.
Yeah, there's a lot of people are shorting the Canadian dollar right now. So,
and I like this coming from Bam Bam. So I'll read it from here. It says, I'm from Ontario, but I'll move to Alberta and help separate if I can be convinced that it's possible. And then continues, I guess I want to know if Alberta is ready to fight, like fight, not just roll over and break the referendum or reject the results.
Well, and this is what I was saying in the beginning. When we thought it was a binding referendum, I was having a call to action for all conservatives across Canada to move to Alberta to vote to separate. But then it changed from a binding referendum to a non-binding referendum. And it's hard to make that call to action with a non-binding referendum. But once we get back to that binding referendum and people really know there's a real set date for an action for separation, if we just make it past this vote, you're going to see the enthusiasm of the youth come up. You're going to see conservatives from across Canada begin to move to Alberta.
Philip Vespa says the CDC is Dutch propaganda. Yes, she just completely ignored his point when are these commentators going to say, hold on, you didn't address what I said? Well, never, because they want to be invited back, and that is the big issue as well.
Okay, and let's get into the last section here if we can.
Yes. Speaking of actually the Canadian dollar and how it's going to continue to fail and to fall and become the Canadian peso, let's get into the economic cliff. Yep, they're all pretty much loony at this point. Martin Ufel says, quote, Carney is pointing to the energy reality both countries share. Canada supplies 99% of U.S. natural gas imports, 85% of its electricity imports, and 60% of its crude. He says Washington may talk tough on trade, but it doesn't want to tap that tap turned off.
Well, and he's trying to make hard threats here, but in a soft way, saying we control all this. Actually, America is well diversified. They choose to go to Canada because it's the easiest and closest trading partner, but they could easily go to other countries. They're currently diversifying through Venezuela. They can make a deal with Iran, get massive amounts of oil, and Russia for lumber and other things. They could simply take down some of the regulations they have on them, and instantly overnight, they would be able to resupply from other regions. And it's very interesting because they can resupply from allies or from enemies.
But the U.S.'s narrow merchandise trade deficit only exists because the U.S. buys so much of its energy from Canada. Canada fuels American growth, supplying 99% of their natural gas imports, 85% of their electricity imports, 60% of their crude oil imports. I don't think they want us to stop sending any of that energy. And if you look more broadly at the comprehensive U.S.-Canada trade balance, which includes the many services from finance to entertainment that we buy from the United States, that shows a persistent American trade surplus. But the U.S.
And again, a lot of this can be provided from Mexico as well, which is very, very interesting. So,
and I will say, he sounds dumb, because if you're not seeing the repositioning and the changing of strategy that the U.S. has been doing since essentially Trump got in, but especially if you read, I always bring it up, the national security strategy that they came up with in November, you would understand what they're doing, not just with, for example, the Shield of the Americas, Venezuela, Cuba, etc., but also over in the Middle East, and why they might be there for further reasons than just they want to go to war.
It's all focused on the Western Hemisphere. And if Mark Carney thinks Donald Trump's not going to break the back of Canada to get them on board with this Western Hemispheric strategy, he's sadly mistaken. He's going to get his elbows broken here, along with his knees.
But next, CBC Watcher says, and we showed this clip yesterday, but it has that important section. Barry Appleton is a professor specializing in international negotiations trade, and he discussed recently about why Canada is negotiating or isn't negotiating the way they are.
And I put this clip back in today, but I shortened it just to the necessary bit about Mexico building in a mechanism that gives them protections because they're in official negotiations. This prevents Trump from giving any further threatening tariffs to Mexico because they're in official negotiations. Canada never entered official negotiations, despite what the mainstream media and the independent media seem to kind of neglect or never mention.
And then there are two things. Normally, when you get a delay or you buy anything in the trade world, you get what's called a standstill. The Mexicans have a standstill. That's an agreement from the president of the United States not to impose more tariffs. We don't have that. So we don't have a standstill, and we don't have a thing called a snapback. A snapback is if you don't trust the other side, it automatically punishes them with a penalty. Now, a lot of Canadians don't trust President Trump. So you would think the first thing that Canada would want is a snapback. So those are the things I'm looking for: standstill and snapback.
Why don't we have a standstill or snapback?
It's above my pay grade. Ask the minister.
Okay. Then let me ask you this. You had mentioned before you jumped on air.
And pause it for a moment. And again, Mexico actually had to give a lot of concessions in the beginning in order to get into official negotiations and get that standstill so they wouldn't be subject to any future tariffs. Part of what Canada was negotiating yesterday was to get into official trade talks so they can build a mechanism in so no further tariff threats could be made. And they failed to launch.
you find it interesting that the Canadian government is not releasing information. Talk to me a bit about that. What's your concern there?
Okay, well, first of all, it's a choice. The Canadian government, though, we are all seeing, we don't know what's going on. We get a tweet from Donald Trump with the Keystone XL pipeline that we knew nothing of being in this negotiation coming out of the ground, okay? And we see a tweet from the U.S. Trade Representative's Office, USTR, that said that our digital future, there's an alignment on digital trade. So everything from AI to streaming to Canadian content to maybe French language content, all of that has been aligned to American standards. Where the hell did that come from? We know nothing. Now, let's look by comparison to the Mexicans. The Mexicans have had 3 full negotiations. In each negotiation, we know when it's going to be scheduled. In each negotiation, each day has an agenda, a topic. The topic today is going to be lumber. The topic today is going to be autos. And each day we get a readout, what they agreed upon. So we don't have to live on tweets with Mexico. We get an official statement. Right now, Canadians don't know, so we're worried. We're anxious. You see this everywhere. And we see
And pause it. You can leave it there. And the reason they don't want official readouts and they don't want to enter into official negotiations is they want to lie to the Canadian public. And because they have a monopoly within the mainstream media, their lies tend to stick with the elbows up crowd. But when you compare it to how Mexico conducted these negotiations, this is exactly how it should have been done. And Canada needs to wake up. There's still an opportunity. You can conduct yourself like the Mexicans did. The problem is, I think there's a bigger strategy behind the scenes, and they never wanted a deal. That's why they never entered into official negotiations.
And especially with Mexico saying that this specific government, which is the Morena government, the former President AMLO's party, and now with Claudia Sheinbaum, it's the least transparent government we've ever had. And yet, by comparison, even professors and international trade are saying, hey, well, Mexico is being very transparent about these trade deals, which is insane if you're comparing Canada now to the disaster that is Mexico.
I'm very hard on Claudia Sheinbaum because she's a very woke left-leaning president. She's failed at almost everything except when it came to these trade deals. She played it almost perfectly. I've been overly impressed with her. Anytime I talk about her now, I talk about these trade negotiations. That being said, she's still a far left ideologue and I don't like her, but she was magnificent when it came to these trade deals. I fully expect a cancellation of the USMCA at some point and a bilateral deal for the Mexicans coming shortly, probably sometime after the midterms.
And again, with Mexico, it might have also been because the U.S. had or used a lot more of the leverage that they have against Mexico or on Mexico, but it still worked. And now it is actually benefiting Mexico too. Jay Gen Xer says, by the way, I'm from Mexico and now we live in Mexico. We lived in Canada for a long time. Jay Gen Xer says, quote, Mexico swallowed the insults. Canada performed them. That's the whole file. Mexico's economy minister says about 85% of their exports still enter the U.S. tariff-free. They sat through 3 rounds of talks in July. 4th round is already booked for September. Canada got the cowboy hat, the pancake flip, the Italy vacations, the elbows up ads, thinking Trump put a 50% tariff on the table, covering about $20 billion in Canadian goods, dairy, alcohol, hundreds of other lines. Mexico kept market access. We got a deadline. Carney ran as the only man who could take on Trump. Then he tweeted, the biggest customer we have, like a campaign slogan. You don't win a trade war with the press conference, you win it at the table. And Mexico understood that, while Ottawa still thinks the performance is the job. And now has doomed all Canadians.
And you figure the Mexicans have a lot more rounds of negotiations to go through now, especially with the situation Canada has put themselves in. The Americans are going to want to negotiate a lot of the things they were getting from Canada. They're going to want to get from Mexico because they're going to want to secure a supply line from land.
And I will also, from that, but I will also say, once again, it's not just Mexico now that the U.S. is essentially allied and working with because of that shield of the Americas and cooperation on security and both defense and national security for not just the U.S., but all the other countries as well. There's that too. I mean, now it's the entire continent except for Brazil, Nicaragua, and now Canada.
Well, in October, there's 3 major elections. There's the Canadian independence election in Alberta. Then Brazil has its election. If Brazil goes right wing, all the countries in South America, most in Central America, and even the ones that aren't right-wing are cooperating with Trump and the United States. Canada would be the only holdout at that point, and Nicaragua. Both countries happen to be banning Bibles at this point.
And
or at least verses in Canada.
And being led by insane communist dictators, But now let's go back to your comments. I'll try to read as many as I can before we head over to RUMBLE. We usually try to end by
That's all right. Let's read them out.
Sean, because he wants to leave. Sean says Canada's best days have been when it pulls into the USA, and its worst days when it goes when it does stuff like Ford is suggesting. Guys hanging out in Point Roberts, I see. Well, he was kind of close to there. Sean says, Guy, as someone who worked, okay, I'll just wait for these until the guy comes back. Sean says only 100,000. I mean, California was losing nearly double that to the other states. And says, oh no, my maple syrup, darn you, PP, I defended your apple eating. As you know, at least me on this channel, I'm not a big fan of PP. Kind of never was. Chris Wilt says, that's how you become a communist country. Yep. And a lot of communist countries actually voted for their dictator leaders. So, I mean, it's right on schedule, I would say. Sean says, Guy, as someone who worked in the industry, how will all the bad blood between Ottawa and Washington affect the film industry in Vancouver, BC and Toronto? Note, I put BC to distinguish American Vancouver. Yeah, we worked in the film industry in Vancouver for a while, but what do you say?
Yeah, it already started to die when we left. That actually, I was actually happy when we left Vancouver and we moved to Mexico because I still had access to the union list and the movie list, what was being filmed. At any time in Vancouver, you're having 60 or more shows filmed. Shortly after we left, it was down to like 20, and it was getting whittled away more and more. So, and Trump is trying to be protective of the film industry within the United States as well as diversify it. Yes. He has some major players. Angelina Jolie's father is one of them. John Voight. Sylvester Stallone, and a couple others is his go-betweens there. So I don't think it's going to be too good for Canada at all.
No, I mean, and they were already just kind of giving dying series and like Warner Brothers style series to Vancouver and Toronto, some films, but not that many.
The two big things that always helped out the Canadian film industry was a very weak dollar and very high subsidies. You could film 2 movies for the price of one in Vancouver, and that's why they had a thriving industry. The subsidies have a lot of competition now. A lot of places in the United States are actually giving the equivalent subsidies, and the dollar, at least right now, is high, but also Trump's trying to put some kind of tariff on different films filmed internationally. So we'll see how he works that out, especially with the bad blood between Canada now.
And also with the failure of Hollywood in California and a lot of production houses actually moving, at least some productions outside of California because of the same issues of taxing, et cetera, and how insane it is to try to make a movie there. Well, now other states are also offering a lot of advantages for studios that want to move. And we're seeing Paramount eyeing other states.
We can continue.
Option Trader says, but the overregulation has erased the profit advantage of making cars in Canada. And now they're importing Chinese cars as well, which Doug Ford, I'm sure, is very happy about. Ray Davis says, Hillier Investigates spelled this out last year. Okay. And Ray Davis says, bingo, this young man gets it. I don't know if you or someone we were watching, but.
Well, and there's another thing we have to realize here when it comes to lumber and a lot of other natural resources. America has an abundance within their own borders, including Alaska when it comes to oil and natural gas. And they've just started to unlock that and deregulate under Trump. Under Biden, there was so much mass regulations, it was hard to access a lot of this stuff, especially in Alaska when it comes to oil and natural gas. Trump is absolutely handing contracts out left and right.
Ray Davis says, maybe about us says, what a team. Good work, you two. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here as well. Option Trader says, Canada never made any car makers, and it's an industry you don't control because it's not yours.
Yeah,
exactly. And now it's leaving because it doesn't make sense to continue to be there, even if Doug Ford shakes his little fists and his fat belly.
And again, a lot of the things the Americans are asking from the Canadians, they've already asked from the Mexicans. The Mexicans gave it to them. And let me tell you, we now live here in Mexico because we fled Canada because of their policies. And there's major benefits and add-on effects to most of the things the Americans are asking for. They asked the Mexicans to start kicking out Chinese car manufacturing. And it's been a great thing because what the Chinese were doing, were sending cars over here that were 90% complete and just finishing them off here. So it was actually very little work before they shipped them to the States. Now these supply lines are being owned and used from end-to-end manufacturing and owned by the Mexicans or the Americans, which is having a mass benefit.
Tim Burns says, I don't know if About Us or something we played, but says, who left the door open at the special ed class? Mike DeMore says, everybody in America is doing fine, brother. I can't believe Canada is trying to get Trump blamed for everything. Let's call TDS.
Yeah.
And they've been using that strategy for too long. Again, that's what got Carney selected because he didn't get elected.
Well, and again, I know I keep bringing it up to the nth extent, but federalization depends on framing Donald Trump as the bad guy, and we need to stand together as Canadians to build a better future for Canadians. This is why you don't see anybody stepping out of bounds when it comes to this talk of federalization. Both the conservatives and the liberals say we need to have our elbows up. We need to have mass tariffs or retaliatory tariffs on the Americans, and we need to stand together. Yes. And this is going to continue with bailouts and transferring of provincial power to the federal government.
Oh, no, I'm guessing he was talking about Wap Canoe because we're in the canoe comment section. Dal Robinson says, Wobbly Knucklehead is an NDP wingnut. Yes.
Yeah.
Ali the Free says, why the heck does Wobbly Canoe seem to think Trump was elected to serve Canada? Exactly. And that, oh God, that's just retardation. Mike DeMore says, I just bought 3 dozen eggs for 95 cents.
Yeah. And why doesn't Wap Canoe actually manage his own profits rather than taking a bunch of welfare payments from Alberta like every other province, because he can't build an economy that can stand on its own 2 feet.
And Rage Against the Machine, thank you so much for the $10 super chat. And it's a quote, I'm guessing. Oh, no, it's not. Says, for too long, we walked with the weight of uncertainty on our backs. For too long, we've been told to shrink, to quiet down, to let others decide the course of our future. And I say, not anymore.
Yeah, not anymore. Now is the time to stand up. That is a perfect quote to say right now, after what happened today with the federal government. Albertans need to stand up now.
And also notice where you're being led and what you're being led to, which is it's becoming clearer and clearer as each day passes.
It's worse than Mark Carney's never going to build a pipeline. That's what a lot of content creators in Alberta Independent say. No, he's going to build all these pipelines. He's going to develop all these natural resources. It's just not going to benefit the people of the provinces. It's going to benefit the federal government. It's far worse than not building a pipeline. It's taking your sovereignty and your freedoms away and putting it in the federal government's hands.
Jason Miesk, I guess, says, so Carney screwed us again. Like, who didn't see that one coming? LOL. A lot of elbows up, people that are now going to start and continue to try to defend it and continue to put up the proposition of, oh, well, let's just let the federal government take control of it and help us out, bail us out. Option Trader says, Wobbly Canoe and your media and politicians are speaking to your elbows up crowd and hoping to interfere in our midterm elections, which is also hilarious that the Canadian media is so focused on the midterms, which they're also misinforming the Canadian public.
Well, I forgot to bring that up, and I was often bringing it up. Canada and the globalists want to hurt the midterms or having the biggest impact they can in the midterms. Trump knows that. And after the midterms are over, Trump's still going to be in office. This is his last term, and there's going to be hell to pay for the Canadians. What does that mean? That means Trump is going to exit the USMCA. He's going to put that 6-month notice in after they finalize a bilateral deal with the Mexicans. Yeah, great point by you. I been bringing that up in previous episodes. I meant to bring it up today and I forgot.
Mike DeMore says, I don't see that fat politician running anywhere. Talking about Doug Ford. Philip Vespa says, Thuggy boy, you're hurting them by sabotaging the deal. Exactly. Hurting his own people.
Well, again, what did we see there? We seen Wab Canoe from the NDP. We seen Mark Carney. We even seen Pierre Poilievre, Doug Ford, and there was plenty of other politicians from all sides saying we can't deal with Donald Trump. Yeah. We need to have dollar for dollar tariffs. They're all in the same boat when it comes to this one thing because there's a bigger mechanism at play here, and it's federalization.
Tim Burns, I'm guessing in the U.S., says, I got 4 dozen eggs for 24 of PBR. PBR. Option Trader says, ask Doug Ford, and again, Option Trader is in the U.S., says, ask Doug Ford how he plans to dismantle us again, $2.3 trillion economy versus a $33 trillion economy and 75% of your exports. Come here.
Trump has gotten into office and he's been in there less than 2 years and he started to dismantle the Chinese economy for the first time. By GDP, America is outperforming China for the first time in decades. And you're telling me Canada thinks there's some kind of threat here?
Option Trader says Canadian job growth is almost entirely government jobs. That's not job growth, that's socialism. And exactly, I was going to bring it up and I forgot as that guy was, as Doug Ford, I think it was saying, oh, we created all these. Yeah, it's all working for the government, which once again is the path towards socialism.
There was two ways they manipulated the numbers there. Number one was government jobs. We talk about that a lot. But the other one, the recent influx in jobs actually wasn't government jobs. What it was from was FIFA.
Oh, yeah.
And that was all temporary jobs. And they're going to be gone just as quick as they were there because FIFA is now over. So they're bragging about an event they had to pay billions of dollars to. They had to pay for those jobs, basically. And they're gone now.
Jason Miesk says, I would give memberships, but I live in a van just down by the river. Thank you so much.
That's all right. Thank you.
That's okay. Thank you for being here and for commenting.
Maybe you live by Tim Pool. He's always saying he lives by.
Yeah. Say hi to him for us. Tim Burns says, not dozen, flats of ice.
Yeah.
Cindy Melnick says, let's not forget we pay their wages and they're not suffering, yet we the people pay their wages, and so no bailouts.
Yeah.
For the provinces. Yeah. Holden, almost said the whole name. Holden says Carl was never going to accept a deal. He wants to top-down centralize government control because Carl is a commie, because he's Karl Marx, Mark Carney.
Well, and again, I know a lot of people that watch the show are conservative, and I'm one of the few conservatives that have talked about federalization for the last year, and every time Mark Carney builds a mechanism, I'm always pointing out this is a federalization mechanism, but now the liberals are talking about it, and they're talking about it in conjunction with, we don't want a trade deal with the Americans, we want federalization. We showed that one clip earlier, but there's a lot more out there. I watch a lot of liberal media so I can stay clued in.
Jason Miesk says, I live in BC. Oh, God bless your soul.
We used to live in BC.
Yes. It says, I live in BC, so my only hope is for Poilievre to become prime minister. We're so cooked, buds. These tariffs is going to hit BC hard. Man, money is getting more tight. And it was already getting bad when we were there. Well, we left more than 2 years ago.
Once we get past the non-binding referendum, the binding referendum will come up. If you can change your address to Alberta once they break free, it would be absolutely massive, or even have two addresses so you're entitled to Albertan citizenship and vote in the binding referendum. Vote for freedom. There will be a lot of conservatives moving to Alberta once that binding referendum comes out to vote for freedom.
Just move. Mig says, as an American, I can't confirm no shit's given. I have to say, because it was funny. Because everybody's saying, oh, the Americans are going to care.
Well,
Nobody,
and again,
the Americans don't care.
I was born in Canada, raised there half of my life, but the other half of my life, I actually lived in the United States. And let me tell you, they don't know anything about Canada. They don't care about Canada. It doesn't affect them. When I said I was from Canada, people with a straight face would say, oh, you used to live in an igloo? Not even joking about it.
And I'm originally from Mexico, lived my whole life in Mexico City, lived in Vancouver, Canada for 13 years. And then we moved back because we realized about 4 years ago, no more, like 6 years ago now, where it was headed. Ellie the Free says, Carney saying, hey kid, want to try a bailout? Trust me, all the cool kids are doing it. First one's free. And he's a banker, so he would know.
Again, there's going to be bailouts for the provinces, bailouts for businesses, and bailouts for citizens in the form of UBI. And they're all going to come with strings attached. Yeah. If not on the first round, on the second and third round. You're going to have to give up your freedoms as citizens. You're going to have to give up sovereignty as provinces. And you're going to have to give up percentages of your businesses in the private industry.
Option Trader says Hollywood has largely left the Vancouver film industry for Atlanta. Yeah, and they're checking out different states that are also giving them.
Well, actually, Texas and Tennessee are having a major come up right now, and they're building the permanent infrastructure that is needed.
Jason Miesk says, we wouldn't be in this mess if Poilievre was running the show. Well, but he says a lot of great things, but has he ever really done or been able to do much or anything?
I like Poilievre's cultural carve-outs and a lot of the things that he's saying. The problem is when it comes to federalization, if Mark Carney becomes so unpopular or it's unable to win an election, possibly Poilievre or another conservative is going to take his place and they'll finish off federalization. So as much as you may like him for cultural issues, which I like, when it comes to federalization and taking people's freedoms, I think Canada is cooked at this point because both the conservatives and the liberals will have the same ultimate goal there. Mark Carney is going to build the mechanisms, and it may end up being the conservatives that finish off federalization, while the conservatives actually cheer it on, not realizing what federalization actually means.
Jason says Alberta is going bye-bye. Good for them. At least they found a solution. And also says it guarantees Saskatchewan will be the next province to go independent. I don't think Saskatchewan at this point might have even a chance to try to do it.
Yeah, Saskatchewan started late. There's some federal mechanisms or provincial mechanisms standing in their way. And I don't think Scott Moe is going to help them out. I think their timeline, they're too far behind, especially with the new timeline Mark Carney is going to be on. This mechanism of pulling out of this deal and moving towards federalization at breakneck speed. I was kind of waiting for this coin to turn. It turned today, and I wish Saskatchewan can get out, but I think their timeline, they're too far behind.
Jason also says, hopefully BC wakes up before it's too late, and we're deep in socialism here. Just no common sense, and my province is paying for it. EB is an effing idiot.
Well, if Alberta breaks free...
One BC, Dallas Brody.
If Alberta breaks free, it completely isolates British Columbia. There could be a change in heart on a lot of different things at that point. It could dramatically change the outlook of British Columbia.
Option Trader says, Pierre says the same lies as Carney on trade. 75% of your exports come to America. How does Pierre plan to replace that? To whom? It's the same scale. At the same scale, it's a lie.
He doesn't want to replace it. They want federalization. The mechanism for federalization is no deal with the Americans and a collapsing economy.
Silverfeet asks, is there any way to force Danielle to move the other 9 questions vote to 1 week forward?
No, I'm almost thinking this was a plan as well. They're outsourcing a lot of these jobs for the poll counters, for the poll watchers outside of Alberta. If you wouldn't have stacked 10 questions on 10 separate ballots, there would have been no need for this.
Yeah. Jason says, after all the BS we've been through, I'm still proud to be Canadian. It's sad Canada is breaking up. Who would have thought it would be in our lifetime?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not proud to be an Indian, and I think that's what Canada is going to be turning into by the end of 2028. Now, Alberta still holds those Canadian values. If you want to save Canada, you save Canada through Alberta independence at this point, because it has those fundamental Western values, which Canada's turned its back on. The EU has turned its back on. Britain has. Only the United States is staying strong.
Yeah, and now apparently also a lot of Latin American countries are kind of turning towards that version of
because Latin
Western
American
values.
countries have already been through socialism,
Yes.
and they realize the
Communism.
mistakes of that. They want a chance at real capitalism. That's why they want to clean up their countries from organized crime.
And in conjunction with the U.S. and get actual partners with the U.S. Sean says, where else will we get natural gas? That means nothing. But Carney, piggybacking off Alberta resources as Canadian as part of trade to the U.S. would be a bigger call for independence, as Carney's games hurt Alberta more than anyone.
Yeah, I think what Carney is kind of banking on is potentially he wants to win this non-binding referendum and take it as Albertans want federalization, or that's how he's going to pitch it.
Jason Meese says, I'm not looking forward to the price hikes. El Bozos, yeah. And then BC, God. Sean says, Bald Guy says, we know exactly what the USA would do. How does he know that? Mind reading? 2 different countries with different trade policies and products. What a loser.
Well, and my advice to Canadians, 90% of Canadians live within 60 miles of the border. If you want to avoid price hikes, drive down to America for the day, pick up your groceries and fill up your tank there.
Yeah. Rage Against Machine says, I get more and better news from you too. This media BS has to be addressed. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. We try, and we try to correct ourselves when we get something wrong as well, which they never do. Sean says, never heard about this standstill snapback despite being on X all day. That's why I subbed here. Thank you so much. And yeah, it was insane that nobody else was talking about it. And it even came up. I mean, that was a CBC interview.
Well, the standstill, like every single liberal media outlet is saying Trump is going to continuously tariff others. There's no way to stop him. Well, yeah, there is a way to stop them. A standstill. The Mexicans have it baked into their deal, but in order to get a standstill, you would have to enter into official negotiations. And although Mark Carney talks like he's in official negotiations, Canada has never entered official negotiations. That has to be intentional at this point.
Sean says, sorry I got Guy going. I know he's passionate about the film, and I'm passionate about the film industry, and he tapped on his little table and didn't let me talk about it.
I'm the one that makes the set snap.
Yeah, but I used to work there too. Jason says this debt will go on to the next 5 generations.
Nat, I got you your job in the film industry. The only reason they hired you is because you were a woman and they had to tick a box.
Sure. Jason Meese says this debt will go on to the next 5 generations. I mean, the rest of it, which will probably all be from India. So I don't know if they'll care.
There will be no debt once the country turns communist.
Exactly. Yeah, the debt gets erased right away. Ask Cuba and Venezuela. Todd says, and the USSR. Todd says, I'm going to make a movie called Fleeing Communist Canada. Oh, we can help. I mean, we already did it. We can star in it. Rage says, I will help, Todd. Yeah, so will we. And Sean says, Carney won't build the Canadian Shield pipeline because it doesn't help the Laurentian elite. Want to help Canada, then build Keystone and build a pipeline to stop the tanker ban on Prince Rupert as well.
Well,
yeah, but I mean,
I think a lot of people from Alberta and the rest of Canada that says Mark Carney's never going to invest in natural resources are going to be shocked what happens once he pulls off federalization. I think he's banked everything on natural resources, completely opposite to what everybody thinks. And I think the reason he's banking at all that is the EU's bailout plan. That is the globalist bailout plan for their utopia after Trump kind of crushed their little dreams.
Mm-hmm. Rage says the 9 bad laws, and Todd says, yeah, Rage, I can see us now flying across the countryside into the U.S. in a Mad Max-style doom buggy, Canadian drones and helicopters in pursuit.
Yeah.
William Robel, hello, thank you for being here. Says, howdy, so late to the show. That's okay. But I have to ask whether anyone has asked Danielle Smith her views, or did she give her views on the failed trade deal? And I was kind of looking for it too.
Yeah, I found it. I didn't have time to put it in there. I had so much news for today. She said that she wanted zero tariff trade with the Americans. She's actually carving out a different position. There's only 2 conservatives carving out a different position. It's Danielle Smith and Jamil Javani. I think those are I think they want to carve out an opposite position in case Mark Carney does step down at some point. They need a populist conservative that can step in there and finish off federalization once the mechanisms are kind of built. It's a good strategy on her part, even though I don't like her. Do not trust her. We need a leadership review on her, and to get rid of her, we'll never get a binding referendum as long as she's in there. I know she keeps saying the spring. She's changed her tune, and she can't be trusted.
Sean says Washington State had a bump on its economic numbers because of the FIFA World Cup too. So did Mexico, and so did every single other state and province, both in Canada and the U.S. But it doesn't count because it was, what, a month and a half?
Well, and they had to pay billions of dollars for that thing.
Yeah. Rage Against Machine says, I wanted to fly choppers, was about to try for the license years ago and went a different path. Wish I was with the chopper pilot job. You could escape faster.
Maybe you can just buy your certificate in South Africa and they'll let you fly choppers in Canada. That's how they get their doctors. We're actually going to have a little bit of an expose on that on Monday. There was a big report on that.
William Robel says, where's the money for those bailouts going to come from? Alberta? Mm-hmm. He said, he specifically said 25 billion. And who was it? Daryl Robinson actually pointed out that's about as much as Albertans have to give away. Jason says these effers burn our flag and they don't go to jail for that. Insane. Jails don't count in Canada. William Robel says Polyev would do no better job right now. And I have to kind of fully agree because he's been saying this exact same thing, that we have to be united and we have to stand up to the U.S. Just the same lines Carney and the Liberals do.
Yeah, the globalist plans are working to perfection in Canada, whether it's federalization or mass immigration or private property rights. You will own nothing and be happy. The way their plans were supposed to work, even though Trump threw a monkey wrench in it, they're still on schedule in Canada. Not any other country, but Canada is, because of the level of natural resources that they have, they're able to shift. Now, they wanted to do it without Canada's natural resources. They wanted to do it with Russia's natural resources, but they realized there's some hiccups with that plan.
Rage Against Machine says PP won't change anything. It's a unit party. And I fully agree. William Rebel says Saskatchewan will simply declare independence post Scott Moe, but who knows where they'll be at that point. What would Canada be at that point even?
Well, what was the comment?
That Saskatchewan will declare independence post Scott Moe, like once Scott Moe leaves.
Yeah, there's a couple things that are standing in their way from actually having a vote and other things. I mean, at a certain point, people may have to stand up in Saskatchewan and just declare a unilateral declaration of independence because I don't know if they're going to even be able to get to a vote.
Yeah.
They keep just blocking everything they try to do in that province.
Philip Espa says conservatives will never forgive PP and Danielle for their treachery. Historians of Alberta will not remember them fondly. And I agree with that as well. And again, I've been hard on PP's case for a long time now. Even you kind of took a bit longer to turn.
Yeah, well, it's funny
But I
because his numbers are dramatically falling in Alberta. And when you watch Wyatt Claypool or some other conservatives that follow polling numbers, they go, that's impossible. These are fake polls. There's no way Poilievre's not popular in Alberta. And it's like, you don't have your finger on the pulse of Alberta independence. Yeah. We've seen through Danielle Smith, Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Party vote harder and wait 3 years. Canada is going to be collapsed in 3 years. The citizens have taken control of their own future and said freedom is what we want. Alberta independence is what we want. His polling numbers make complete sense to anybody that's clued into Alberta independence right now.
But and because Alberta is that one conservative stronghold that is an existential threat if they leave to the Conservative Party itself. That's why there's so many of them that are against it. When in reality, because of the morals and values and supposed stance that they have, stop tapping the table. I get to talk to. The supposed stance they have, it actually affects them. Now you made me lost my point. Jason says, I'll start tapping the table on YouTube. Jason says, conservative problem is that most of the Canadian population is saturated in places like Ottawa and Toronto and Quebec. They're the SOBs that are keeping the Liberals in power. Yes, but also, do we have enough faith in PP? That would be my question.
Well, Canadians just don't have enough backbone. That's why the only real independence movement that has a shot is Alberta independence. And even then, they're playing it extremely, extremely nice. At a certain point, we're just going to have to say no more to the federal government. If it takes a unilateral declaration of independence, then that's what it takes. If they're not going to give us a binding referendum, then we're just going to have to take our independence at a certain point, period. You're going to have a little bit more of an American attitude if the Canadian government wants to play dirty tricks in a non-binding referendum.
Sean says BC has a demographic problem. Its major population center has become Chinese or PRC adjacent, but now is quickly turning into India as well.
Yeah, it was interesting because a lot of the immigration that was coming into Canada was 60% Chinese. Now it's 60% Indian.
Sean says, guys, exactly right. He will take the vote against independence, even a narrow one, and will double down on authoritarianism over Alberta.
Yeah.
Philip Vespa says, zero tariff trade. She is unreasonable. Talking about Danielle Smith, tariffs are the new norm. Get with the program. And Sean says, I would be a great South African doctor. I'm sure you would. Option Trader says, I started a business in Alberta as recently as 2014. Canada had a better quality of life than a lot of U.S. states. Not money, but quality of life. Now it's a crap show up there. It's a third world country. Well, and they just haven't admitted it to themselves yet, but you are. I come from one.
Back in 2010, 2011, actually, Canada had a better quality of life than the United States. The dollar was higher. Everything was actually better. That was under the Conservative government. No longer is that the case. How far they have fallen, and they're about to fall a whole lot farther.
Option Trader says, at least my business is doing just fine. Well, that's good to hear. And hopefully once Alberta becomes independent, you'll get even better business. Jason says, I just want affordability. I mean, don't we all? But it's tending on the complete opposite direction. And we have billions of reasons why we left Canada and why we left Vancouver, but that was one of them too.
Albertans will only get affordability if they take a stand here with independence and you come out and vote on the day of October 19th and vote again on the next binding referendum and stand strong and are willing to declare a unilateral declaration of independence if the government won't respect the results of that binding referendum.
And William Rebell says, Guy, that's what I'm saying regarding Saskatchewan independence. Yeah. And Jason lastly says, I agree, Poilievre needs to get more involved instead of sitting on the sidelines. And also says remigration. Yes, remigration. And with Poilievre, I mean, again, he can say a lot of things and can ask everybody in Alberta to wait for him for 3 more years to see if he can get in. But every time other polls come up with Carney at the top and Poilievre actually doing badly in general in Canada, people are also shocked and saying, oh, but how come, blah, 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 Carney's doing such a bad job. A lot of conservatives that would have voted for Poilievre got fed up and actually left. So they're not even in the country anymore to get him in the first place.
He's controlled opposition at this point. Yes. It's a controlled dialectic. That's why Poilievre, as a conservative right now, has the exact same strategy when it comes to the United States as the Liberals because they want federalization, but they're holding two conservatives in the wings with different strategies, like Jamil Javani and like Danielle Smith, in case this thing goes awry and the Canadian public sours on this idea of federalization. They want to build the mechanisms, bring the populist in, which will be Jamil Javani or Danielle Smith, and she'll finish it off. Well, the conservatives cheer it on.
Todd says, peace out, y'all. Peace out. Says, going to hang out with my pops around a fire with some Wisers. I thought it said Wieners. Let's go, Alberta. Independence talk. Till you later. Thank you so much for being here. And Option Trader says, I started my business in Alberta back in 2009, but 2014 things started going down. Who came in very recently, very soon after that? But now we're heading over to RUMBLE. You can find our username right here. It's the exact same one as here. The show is not over. We still have some spicy stories to talk about over there, plus a lot of Rumble comments to RUMBLE comments to read. So follow us there. Don't forget to subscribe before we head over there.
It's a lot of different stories over on Rumble. I saved the non stories about the trade deal for Rumble.
Yes. But we're heading there over right now. 30-second wait screen. Then we'll pop up there. Goodbye, YouTube.
Let's get ready to rumble!